Erica, we got to practice that a little more.
Erica was leading the way. The rest of us were like way behind.
Okay, we're going to lead off with county.
All right, so I'd like to open the November 28th, 2018 County Commissioners meeting. No other announcements, I believe, other than this meeting is being video and audio recorded. There is one other announcement, actually. The Finance Committee public hearing. Oh, am I reading the wrong one? Oh, sorry. There are no other announcements. Is there any public comment? Hearing none, there's no new business. And we'll move on to the approval of minutes and warrants. We'll take them together.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any commissioners' reports or comments?
Nope.
And is there a motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Rita. It's the fastest county meeting ever. I'd like to call to order the Select Board meeting for November 28th, 2018. I'd like to start us off with just a quick story. Last night around 2 a.m., this chirping started happening from my smoke alarm. So my wife and I get up, and we have 3 of them in the house, and we're up for like 2 hours. We can't figure it out. We're changing batteries. So we just finally went to bed. Couldn't figure it out. Happened all day. I'm calling the fire department. I'm trying to figure it out, trying to problem solve this. Like, what is it? It's wiring. I'm calling an electrician. And then about an hour ago, right before I came in, it hit me. There's a CO2 detector that fell off an outlet behind the couch. And the battery ran out like a month ago. Why bring this up? Occam's razor. Occam's razor means, the definition is when you have a complex problem, the simplest solution is usually the answer. So we overthought it too much and stayed up all night. So why I bring that up is, in my first year and a half on this board, we have such complex issues, and sometimes it's better to just go for the simplest solutions to move forward. Sometimes. So this is what I thought an hour ago. I was like, I'm going to tell this story. Having complex issues that we go through every Wednesday night, and nothing on the agenda tonight. I'm not saying this for anything specific, but just to move forward sometimes we just have to kind of go back to very simple reasoning. Okay. Select Board acceptance of the agenda. We have a couple different changes on the consent items. Number 2, that's going to be tabled to January. And then on the public hearings, number 2, we're going to move that up to the front. That's for the hospital. And those are the only 2 changes. Announcements?
This meeting is being video and audio recorded. We have a Finance Committee public hearing scheduled for December 13th, Thursday, December 13th at 4 p.m. at the training room, 2nd floor of this building, for the citizen warrant articles that have been submitted for the 2019 annual town meeting. And we have an agenda an announcement that came up a bit late that the Harbor Master is going to quickly tell us about.
Is this about your smoke alarms, too?
It's not, but that was a great story. Thank you. Pulpus Harbor dredging is going to start next week. Robert B. Hour's moving his equipment. Should be here at the end of this week. So dredging will start next week.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks.
We just want everybody to know that because there's going to be equipment out in the harbor and something happening. So it's a long time coming.
That it?
That's it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Is there any public comment here tonight that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, there's no new business that I know of. Approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve payroll warrants and treasury warrants.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And pending contracts. Libby, anything you want to go over? Or the board, any questions?
I don't know that there's anything in particular. We have several contracts with Nantucket Data Platform for a variety of different projects. We have a 3D modeling contract, which is actually being funded through a state grant with the University of Florida Historic Preservation Program being the contractor. That is going to be actually covered a bit later in an update about coastal resiliency and other plans by Chuck Larson. And I guess it might be a little worth mentioning that there's a contract on the agenda with AGM Marine for removal of the floating docks at the town pier, removal of them, and then reinstallment in the spring. We've gone over this before, but they're happening very shortly.
I had a question on the data platform, 50,000 from Affordable Housing Trust Fund. For what will that entail? Like, what's the details of that? And I see Tucker's here.
Hi, Brooke Moore, Vice Chair for Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So the data platform is performing a deep dive into the housing situation, and we've posed 2 questions for them. The first is to quantify the supply of existing housing on Nantucket, and the second question is more of a survey format that will try to determine the demand for housing. In other words, where are people living? What do they need? And so the idea is for us to be able to quantify the spread between supply and demand, and also identify what the demand is: family size, price, rentals versus home ownership, various interesting pieces of information about who's out there looking, and so
levels.
that it can drive our decisions.
Like the income levels.
Yep, income levels as well.
Strategic
Yep.
plan is to identify what the needs are at all levels.
Exactly. So it's really designed to support the board's strategic goal number 3 under housing.
And if you guys have a rundown of that, I'd love to read it, because how you ask the questions or what you ask, sometimes you get back what you ask. So, for example, the teacher housing, they asked the question, they did a survey and said, geez, what do you guys want? And everyone said, we want a 2-bedroom, we want a 3-bedroom. By the time they got it built, it was too expensive, and none of the people that answered it really wanted that. So you kind of, I want to see the details of how it's going to be done. I think it's a lot of money. And I agree with doing it, but we do a lot of studies, and then we don't have any money left to do the follow-up and spend, and do the work we should have done. So I just want to make sure that we're asking the right questions.
Absolutely. And it's an iterative process with a subset of the people on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And we're giving them a lot of information, of historical information, so that we don't repeat stuff that's already been done as well.
All right.
And just to add to that, we spent about 3 meetings with them going through exactly how these questions would be posed and what they would be answering, and also really questioning what sort of data they're going to be using, how they're going to be collecting it, so that we're not being redundant with what we already have. And as well, what we're hoping is that this will be able to be done in a way that we can update this regularly, so that this becomes a little bit, not a dashboard per se, but something that, particularly with the demands, it can change year to year or every 3 years. So we'd like to be able to capture this information in a more real-time time frame.
How are they? What are they going to use to gather the information? What is the data that they're pulling to gain that information?
The process is so part of what we're paying for is them to determine the process, right? So there's work involved in actually creating the surveys, but it's a survey panel for the demand side of the question, as opposed to the kind of stuff they used for the quantifying the population, where it was aggregated, publicly available data. They're going to be doing hyperlocal survey panel, so they're going to be having respondents, actual people, saying what it is they need and quantifying that. So. Does that help?
Sort of.
And here's Caroline Frey from the data platform.
Yeah.
Hi, Caroline. So for the supply piece, aggregating, curating the data, it's going to come from nationwide sources down to the local sources. So it'll be things like the assessor's roll, Airbnb, scraping those websites, all of the real estate companies on island, the census, everything down to Verbo and all of the local sources. So it'll be a big mix. And there's a lot of data out there you can buy, you can scrape websites, a lot of it's public, so it's the same kind of collection process we did through for the effective population study.
And then on the demand side?
And then on the demand, we're working with Hugh Davis, who owns a company called Critical Mix. He's one of our advisors, and it's a survey company. And they have people who create these questions for a living, so they have PhDs in surveying. And so he's giving us a lot of free advice and guidance on how to create that in a way that will make it representative, in a way that you can ask the questions to actually get the right answers.
and not get people's wishes, get their actual, the real.
Exactly.
Yeah, get the
Yeah.
truth.
There's a lot of science behind it and how to structure the questions and the answer choices to make sure you're getting quality information.
Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to say in general that I've been really impressed with the data platform and how they've
Yeah.
been gathering things and presenting the actual population of Nantucket and so forth. And I'm just glad that the town's found ways to draw from that. I'm excited to see the results.
If there's no other comments or motion,
Motion to approve pending
Second.
contracts.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries unanimously. On to consent items. Remember, number 2, we're going to table that to January. So we have, we can do one full motion, 1 through 6, excluding 2, unless there's questions or for Andrew or Libby or any comments.
My only comment is there was one in there that was the additional land would make it subdividable. I checked the documents and it said that it was not. It was written in that it would not be subdividable without our later consent. So I approve these as long as those documents aren't changed between now and whenever they're done.
Which number is that?
Oh, it was I'd have to pull it up. It was. If it was in the packet, then I'm happy with it. I'm good to
Okay.
go. All right.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Motion to approve. Motion to approve consent items.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously, except number 2. All right, citizen department request. This is planning office request for acceptance of deed from the Cape Cod 5 Cent Savings Bank for a portion of land now known and numbered as 112 Pleasant Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hopefully we have the map. Maybe we can look, there it is. So this is the area shaded in green. It would be added to the land that's already owned by the town, which is shaded in yellow. This particular lot was created as Cape Cod 5 went through the permitting process. The idea was to have municipal use on this corner. The intent, the hope was that eventually this would be sort of upgraded into a little bit of a park in an area at the Mid-Island that doesn't have much going on in terms of benches and places to sit. The plan here now is to put a bus shelter here, which serves an existing bus stop on Pleasant Street. And again, we would ask that you move forward with accepting this. It is no cost to the town, and it actually enhances the existing land we own. Thank you.
Any thoughts, questions?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. Okay, public hearings. We're going to move number 2 up to the front. That's for the hospital underground tank. I'd like to open the public hearings for all.
Be recusing.
Okay, Dawn is recusing from number 2. Okay, we're going to open the public hearing for just number 2. And is there anyone here to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Attorney John Tuig. I represent Nantucket Cottage Hospital. Here for a amended bulk permit license. We have an existing tank on the site. There are 2 new tanks that are installed as part of the new hospital, one for propane, one for diesel fuel. I think we may have, Erica, the picture of it. I do have a handout if people are interested. It's over by the service road. And it's for the functionality. We showed it on the site plan in this location as when we went through planning board. We met with the fire department. Fire department reviewed it. Fire department has issued a set of conditions, which I believe I know the board has received. Those conditions are fine. They're standard protocols and other information that we'll provide on an annual basis and an ongoing basis with regard to training, safety, related issues, and we're certainly fine with all of those conditions. So we're here asking your support for the 2 tanks, 2 additional tanks.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Tuig?
Is a diesel fuel for generators? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
So that's backup generation. Gotcha. Okay.
Anything else?
No. Make a motion to approve.
Well, we have to ask.
Sorry.
We have to. Anybody from the public like to speak on this matter? This is a public hearing. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is that an aye, Matt?
Yes.
Okay, so that passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tuig. Okay, we're going to open the public hearing for number 1, which is A, B, and C. And I think Andrew is going to walk us through A. This is going, we're going to have a little bit of conversation on this, but at the end, we will continue this to January 30th. So we're not going to make any decisions tonight besides continuing it, but I think we're going to kind of go over a couple things. Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these 3 articles before you are essentially your Real Estate 101. This is step 1 in the process. Here, town meeting has authorized you to acquire property that you do not own right now. If you already owned it, we would skip over this particular action. We wouldn't have to take something that we don't own. So this is the first step in process. This particular item A, James Street, is an important parcel which connects Hulbert Avenue to Nantucket Harbor. It's part of 5 streets that were passed in the special town meeting article authorizing these acquisitions. So again, I know we're not going to take action tonight, but this is a critical first step. We've had several discussions with property owners here. They have been cooperative and amenable to changes, some changes that were discussed by a prior board. They've also been accepting of allowing public access and other things that have occurred here, which they don't have to. This is not, these are not public ways, but the intent of the passage was to create some sort of legal public access over these ways to the harbor, and I hope that that's not forgotten and we eventually move to that point.
Andrew, there's 5 streets that was voted on in 2013. Where are the other 4 streets? Where are they at in this process?
So we've already, let's see, we have Henry Street, which we have a plan. We have not finalized that yet. We have Willard Street, which we have finalized, and there is a walking path and areas where dinghies are stored there. Dick Street, which is not yet completed because there's some accreted land and plan adjustments that need to be made. And Johnson Street, which is functioning. It has an existing path there that's been working for quite some time.
So Willard and Johnson have been finalized.
Willard Johnson finalized. Henry Street is almost on its way, and the other 2 need some further work.
So are those easements? Or how are those?
Yes.
How did they get there?
They're easements.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
The record attorney Arthur Reed. Mr. Chairman, I represent the Lilly family, owners of the property at 55 Hulbert Avenue, which is the lot to the right on the plan that's up on the screen. The portion of James Street, which is in purple, I would call it. I guess that's purple. Is the half of James Street, which is on their side of the midline. Ever since the warrant article passed, by which the town authorized the taking of the private ways leading down to the water, and by the way, they are definitely private ways. Years ago, there were public way signs that had been placed out there, but putting a public way sign doesn't make something a public way. And these are not and never have had any public rights in them. So the town meeting warrant article that Andrew referred to authorized the taking. And shortly after that, my clients and I met with Andrew, and we've been talking since in terms of attempting to accomplish this in a way that fulfills the town's wishes in terms of establishing the public access and at the same time respecting our property rights. There are unusual twists to it as far as this is concerned. One is the fact that a portion of the Lilly's house is within the right-of-way, and this is no new thing that they've created. We have a copy of a 1930 land court plan that shows the exact configuration as it exists now of the portion of the house that's within the way. Likewise, part of the garage has been within the way also since the time prior to the Lilly family owning the property, which has been since 1957. In any event, we want to get this accomplished. We want to get it behind us. We want to deal with all the issues relating to the way, and we want you to go ahead and make the taking with the understanding that obviously we will be expecting, that is in other yard sale transactions that have taken place, and the other ones that have taken place on Hulbert Avenue, that it would, and others where there's been waterfront property involved, we would be getting a reconveyance of our side of the road in fee. We would, in return, therefore, grant a one big beach easement in the portion of the property that is within the way, in this case, the portion that's not in front of the house, and that also the town would reserve in the deed an easement for public use coming down the, as we're showing it here, the middle of the way. Now, that is part of the disposition of the property. That isn't what's before you, obviously, in terms of making the taking. But we expect that that will take place. Obviously, the taking takes away some of our rights. It takes away land that we probably own as a result of adverse possession in the area under the house, for example. But with the arrangement that would be worked out, and the typical arrangement, that'll solve our problems. It'll take care of the public access, and will generally, I think, be a win-win situation for all parties involved. My clients are here, and they have considerable background, obviously, with regard to the property, and I know that they'd like to say a few words to the board.
Great.
My name is David Lilly. I'm here with my sister, Suzanne Hutchison. We, with our brother, have been lifelong summer residents on Nantucket, as has been our mother and our grandmother, and we believe our great-grandmother, although we're not entirely clear about that history. As Arthur pointed out, we've been there since 1957, and as a footnote, the town council at the time who did the real estate transaction was Roy Sanguinetti, who also represented the buyer. So it was I guess it was in a day when transactions on Nantucket went probably a little too informally. But in any event, we have been pleased to work with Andrew, and we think that this is a good outcome. Obviously, it's going to change our experience on the property, but we believe in the one big beach principle. We think it's important to the island. And I just want to point out for the record that Hulbert Avenue is pretty much enclosed by tall hedges, as you all know, and guest houses. Our mother and has been vehement about the need to open up view corridors so that people going down Hulbert Avenue can see the actual harbor, much as we could see the harbor in our youth. So she tore out our privet and put in Rosa Vergosa. I'd just point that out to point out that we're very much interested in the public enjoyment of the island. And we hope that this board will move forward and approve this plan ultimately. Thank you. I've got many pictures, and we can answer many questions if there are any.
Yeah. Any questions, comments?
Well, one of the neighbors, we received a few letters on this, and I was on the board when this came up 10 years ago. And so there was concerns then, it kind of was shelved, and we're back again. Some of the people that had concerns were worried when they saw taking and disposition both listed on this map, because we're at the taking portion, and they wanted to make sure that, you know, this board didn't sign off without making sure that the public rights that may or may not exist there are protected. Some of the neighbors across, you know, have been using that for years to bring their sunfishes to the beach, to bring their stuff there. They go back and forth all summer. Is that, and have they still been doing that, or has it been closed?
Well, Actually, it's relatively recent use. For at least from the time that we moved in 1957 up until 2013, that was not used as an access point. In fact, it was thick with Rosa Vergosa and you couldn't walk over it. And then in about 1991 or 2, play space was created in that area and a fence was put up. And it was actually the repair of that fence that precipitated some discussion.
The beginning of this, yeah.
At the time, but it was a pre-existing fence. So it was definitely closed to the public. But then in the latest storm, part of that fence came down, and we've just left it down. We felt that given the fact that we are going to have an outcome that I think is acceptable to us in the town, there was no reason to put the fence back up and be in your face, so to speak, about property rights.
Right.
So that's where it sits today. Okay. But it has not historically been used by the public.
Right.
I would say that one neighbor has been using it since they bought the house, which I think was 4 or 5 years ago. But that's, in our mind, recent.
Right. Yeah, I grew up down there and remember going a lot of those. I grew up down at the jetties. Yeah. We lived down there. We went up and down, and there weren't as many bulkheads. We went up and down through a lot of that from forever. So I just think, and the concerns that the board had previously with that and some of the others, was that a lot of it was being closed, and this is great that we're opening it up. But B is some of these are the only accesses for safety. If somebody gets hurt on the water, the only way you can back up an ambulance along that stretch is in some of these areas. And so 5 feet, I think what we were talking about as a board was it might be 8 feet, just enough to get be able to get a bodyboard or something there. You can't go down the beach anymore there because there's groins the whole way. So that, so that was some of the discussion that was had, and I just want the public to understand that, this is the discussions that the board has had. Those are the discussions we've had with council and with you guys, and if we can get to a place where where the public does have the access and you guys get still have your privacy, that's the right solution for this. So I hope we get there.
What is the public easement width that you've discussed or that would be acceptable to you?
We've shown it as 5 feet on this plan, but that's not cast in stone. That's still a subject for discussion, and I know we're going to meet with the real estate committee soon, and we're continuing to meet with Andrew, and we're interested in your input. I mean, we can certainly live with something more than 5 feet. I think 8 feet is what had been shown on an earlier version. We can talk about all of that, but it's not. That doesn't really come up on the taking. That'll be something to discuss on the disposition.
So you're open to some leeway.
We're open.
Okay.
Yeah. As you'll note, the area on our side of it is there are areas that are used for parking that extend out into the way and so on. But I think that can all still be accomplished with a public access easement width somewhere in that range.
Rita, anything?
No, other than, is there anyone, is it the harbor master who would comment on the need? Because I've heard that come up before, but it would be good to hear from someone with a little more experience or knowledge about the necessity and the width that's needed for access to the beach.
Now we can get that from staff prior to any discussions of it.
May I just comment? There has been substantial accretion there along the waterfront from the jetties almost all the way to our house. And so now travel on the beach by a vehicle, at least up and to our house, not in front yet, is easily accomplished. And there is a road, a town-owned road, down at the westerly end of Hulbert Avenue, and it would be a much more efficient entrance for an emergency vehicle. We have problems with retaining walls and bulkheads that are necessary to keep the sea at bay. I have a rather dramatic picture with me of the perfect storm in '91. If anyone would like to see what can happen down there in the winter.
Well, I appreciate you guys seeing the need for the public use. I think to reserve the easement for public use, whether it's 8 or 10 or 9 or whatever. You talked with Andrew or whatever we talk about the disposition, I think will be great. So keep access, and then like what Matt said, you guys still keep your privacy and as much as possible.
Well, in fairness, the other easements that we're aware of along Hulbert Avenue are, I believe, 5 feet.
Okay.
And we think Equity would have our easement to be about the same width. Now, there may be some special circumstances, but the other practical problem is the width of that drive. That's used as parking for the side entrances of both houses. And there is not enough additional room to go much beyond 5 feet. Now, there's Arthur, I don't mean to practice law, I'm a Minnesota lawyer, but there's the public necessity opportunity for an emergency vehicle to drive over the property without the easement. They can drive right over our lawn if they need to get to the beach in an emergency. So I don't think that's given, yeah, and we don't have a hedge either, so so anyway, that's my comment about that.
Okay.
Lawyers are much nicer out in the Midwest, aren't they?
Oh, they couldn't be nicer than Arthur.
Oh, that wasn't a dig on Arthur.
It's Minnesota nice.
Yeah.
Anything else from the board? Any other comments from the public? Thank you for coming here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you. All right, so we'll close that public. I'm sorry. As soon as I said it, we'll continue the public hearing to January 30th.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
30th.
January 30th.
Matt did.
I did.
It was unanimous. Okay. Number 1B, portions of Nobodere Avenue. We're going to open up public hearing for that. Parcel A on plan, let's see, where is this? Nobodere Ave.
Mr. Chairman, again, this is in the Surfside area. This portion of Nobodere Avenue is not the main portion that you may think of. This is a small dead-end portion that is basically runs on the western side of Surfside Road. So this is near the terminus of that dead-end street. It's a strip that runs adjacent to the existing property. All of the property owners along this, 40 feet for a small dead-end road that serves about 6 lots is a little bit of overkill. So they've asked for this strip to be added to their property, which they've want to install some hedges and landscaping on. And so, again, this is step 1. This is the taking process. We ask that you move forward with the taking. At some point later, we'll talk to you about that eventual disposition.
Any questions, comments for Andrew?
Public hearing?
Yeah, I know. I always check with you guys first. Anybody from the public like to speak on this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Pleasure to the board.
Motion to approve
yeah.
the taking.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That carries.
I'm recusing for the next one.
All right, Don's going to recuse from C. This is for School Street.
Mr. Chairman, same neighborhood, also in Surfside. These are the existing 1888 laid out streets. Here, this particular portion of the road runs north and south. You can see that there's part of a building on a portion of it already. And again, this street is not necessary for the density of the area. So we ask that you move forward with this taking as well.
Questions? Matt? Anybody?
Just on the property that has the yellow strip, the Zevnik property, I believe. Does that add significant ground cover to that property?
I believe it is, I'm trying to see, I can't see the area. I think it's 5,000 square.
9,600.
Thank you. So it's 9,600, and this is in LUG 2, 4% of that. So again, we'll have the chart available for you at the disposition phase, but yeah.
And what we're hoping is when it goes to the real estate committee, if it becomes subdividable, they either say it can't be, or they charge enough for it to, you know, that it's a fair, you know, if you're giving enough that becomes 2 properties, then we need to be reflected in the price.
Right.
But you would hope that that happens
At the
in the
real
next
estate.
review, yeah.
Well, remember too that we put a restriction against subdivision in all
Understood.
of these transfers. So often when you accept these, you're limiting your future
Yes.
ability to subdivide.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone here from the public like to speak on this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. Okay. Dawn can come back if she's out there hiding somewhere. Town managers report.
Okay, the only thing under town manager report for tonight is the monthly town management activity report. And what's in your packet is sort of a number of items which are not exhaustive, but the main things that we've been mostly working on lately. I won't go through every single one of them, but if you, of course, if any of you have questions or comments or whatever, feel free to let me know. The first item, Surfside Crossing, I do want to mention that because that has taken quite a bit of staff time. And I think you know what's been happening on that. We've worked on an appeal to the Mass Division of Fish and Wildlife. As you know, that's been filed. We have not heard back yet. We've developed a couple of letters to the ZBA that were finalized last week and given to the ZBA for their hearing yesterday. A supplemental comment letter that came out of the comments and findings from the independent consultants that the board engaged for hydrogeological, environmental, and traffic. And a comment letter also on the modified proposal, which was put forward by Surfside Crossing. The next hearing was yesterday, and so I did not attend that, but I think a couple of you did. And the next hearing is next Wednesday, I believe. Strategic planning, I won't go too deep into that. I think you know what's happening there, and there's some ongoing activity there. Marijuana dispensaries, again, a lot of time spent on this. Another item upcoming on your agenda is the finalization of a draft request for qualifications, along with some other associated issues with getting facilities underway. Our Island Home is an ongoing project in more ways than one, and a couple of things happening there. We're working to engage an architecture firm to help answer the question of what will it take to develop a new or renovated facility at the current site. There's also been some business modeling done with Clifton Larson Allen, a firm that specializes in nursing home business modeling and other financial issues. And next week, the Island Home Administrator will be coming in to review with you what's called the 5-star quality rating report or 5-star quality report, which the Island Home recently had some activity on. So he's going to come in and explain how that ranking system works. Number of real estate matters, the staffing study, and the Plus operational review. Plus operational review is still a bit underway, but the staffing study draft is in to town administration for finalization. And by finalization, we mean we're simply correcting. All the departments have reviewed their chapters. There's a number of chapters. It's a lengthy report. It's 227 pages, has over 100 recommendations, and you all will be getting a copy of it. Okay, so let me back up. We're in the process of making sure that all the information in it is accurate, and we've spent a lot of time talking to the consultant about it, reading it, ensuring the accuracy of the information. The consultant, which is the Novak Group, the same group that helped us with the strategic plan, will be here for your December 19th meeting to give a presentation of the staffing study. You will be receiving it the week prior, so you'll have over a week to review it, and there will be an executive summary for it. So I don't expect you to read 227 pages as I did, but the executive summary would be good for you to have. And if you have any questions in between the time you get it and the board meeting, we can try to help answer it. So.
Maybe we could get an audiobook format?
An audiobook.
Listen to it on
Do you want me to
Sunday?
read to the 227 pages for you
Yeah.
and do an audiobook? Okay. With different voices and stuff?
Get Erica, read it. It's a good voice. On that, Libby, is there anything in there that stood out where, is it timely to where we have to like get something in the budget or get the capital? Or
We are going to be probably trying to work in some items into the budget. There are a lot, and some of them are long-term, phased items. Some of them we simply are not going to have the capacity to get at anyway, with or without funds soon. But one of the things that I think will come out of this is further engagement of the Novak group to help us with some of the very specific recommendations that are more of longer-term projects. So yes, I think there will be some things that we would like to put into the fiscal 20 budget, and some things are just going to have to wait. The senior center is getting a little active. That group is meeting, or representatives of the group is meeting with Capcom tomorrow with what they've come forward with. They basically, and at some point, I think the senior center work group will come to the board and give a review of its report to date. But I think pretty much they've settled on a site, which is at Sherburne Commons, which is something this board has talked about in the past in any event. And the discussion at Capcom is going to be funding for site design and design space needs and things of a facility at the Sherburne Commons location. Reuse of the fire station, I think you know about. Personnel, number of issues there. I won't go over all of them. They're just listed there for you to review. Fiscal 20 capital is underway. Fiscal 2020 budget is underway. I'm having my usual annual panic attack right at the moment, like literally right now. And also for the next couple of weeks, I will be having it to make sure I get these recommendations completed for your December 19th meeting, which is when we're making our presentation for the general fund budget. Richmond and the MOA for the road takings, as you know, that is underway, and you will be having more discussion about that next week at your executive session meeting. Harbor Place is something that you've also recently discussed in executive session, and we're working towards a meeting with the owners in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Coastal resiliency planning, you're going to hear about from Chuck momentarily. Parks master plan, think you know about that. SBPF, think you know about that. And we have a number of upcoming items which are listed on the sheet.
On the Parks Master Plan, what's the next steps, roughly, on that?
Rob and I talked about that, and the next steps, we talked about that this morning. The next steps would be the preparation pretty much of a draft plan that would probably be ready by mid-springish, with probably some additional stakeholder one-on-one meetings between now and then the development of some capital requests for fiscal 2021 over the summer.
Okay.
Specific probably to Tom Nevers.
Okay. I was curious if there was only going to be one public input session, but it sounds like there's going to be more specific.
Well, they're
stakeholders.
going to be probably some targeted with like larger groups such as community school. They have met with them, other users like that. If we think there's a need for another public info session, I'm sure we could schedule one. Okay. I think about 25 people maybe-ish attended the one that we already had.
There was a conflict because there was the housing forum at the
Yeah,
same time.
there was, yes, true. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Libby. Move on to the select board reports and comments. First issue tonight, ratification of vote at November 14, 2018 meeting for fiscal year 2020 funding for Affordable Housing Trust. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the ratification.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Matt, you?
I'm abstaining, and I'd like to see, I don't like to vote things I don't know what they mean. So I can't support this at this time. I will at future. And I hope that we are looking at this big enough and large enough view. So
Okay. So it was 3-1? Or you're abstaining?
I'm against or abstain, either one.
Okay. Thank you. All right, number 2, confirmation of,
I'm sorry,
Oops, sorry.
they're not the same thing. So I think we just need to document which.
Okay, then I'll be against it because I wanna see something before I vote for it.
okay,
Thank you. That's just, man.
we got you. confirmation of select board attendance participation on panel for January 31st, 2019. We're going to strike affordable housing forum. So to give you guys a little background on this, the Dreamland reached out to me and was interested in having the select board do a panel where the 5 of us would come in and do a kind of Nantucket 2050 or Nantucket 2.0. What is our vision 30, 40, 50 years later? And have it at the Dreamland and have similar to the housing panel that was just recently that Tucker and Don and a lot of people were on. And so I just wanted to bring it up in a public session to see if the board was interested. We want to do that. If that's a good date, are we all going to be here? I think it'd be fairly casual. We don't have to make a motion or anything. I was just like,
Yeah,
is everybody going to be here?
that works for me.
Okay.
And just can you just one more time name the sort of the title?
I don't know if they have the title.
Oh, okay.
This is like something they proposed to me. I said, I think it's a great idea, but I can't send an email out to all of you guys at the same time and ask you
Right.
if you want to do this or have any ideas. So they were going to have a moderator. They didn't say, they had a couple names or they weren't sure. And I said, well, I got to bring it up at open session so we can say if we want to do it or not.
I think it would be great. I hope there's an opportunity for the audience to
Yeah, there will be.
participate.
I think it'd be very similar to the recent housing panel discussion where there's heavy involvement from the audience.
Great. No, I think it sounds like a good idea.
Okay. So I'll reach out to them and say, yay, for the 31st. Okay.
They didn't give you time, did they?
No, I think they wanted to confirm it with us that we wanted to do it before they put it into their advertising and marketing. Is there any conflicts?
Not that I know of right at the moment. We don't currently have a FinCom meeting scheduled for that day. Often there are FinCom meetings at 4 o'clock on Thursdays, this time of year, that time of year. Right now, we don't have one, but I only am slightly hesitant because, weather things sometimes occur and then we have to,
Right.
but that wouldn't really involve you all necessarily.
Right.
anyway.
So I'll mention that to the Dreamland and to see if they can have it at 6 or however they want to work it into their schedule. And if not all of us could be there, it's not the end of the world. All right, number 3. I asked this. I had a conversation with Chuck Larson last week, and we went over these 4 different kind of entities that happened all at the same time on coastal resiliency and hazard mitigation plan. And it took him about 20, 25 minutes to set me straight on how they all work together and what they all were doing. And I was really impressed of everything that's going on. So I asked Chuck and Libby, since he's here, if he could give us an update with Holly as well on the 4 different things that are going on. I think it's good for the board to understand it in full and for the public to know. It's a lot. I mean, compared to a year ago, this time a year ago, we weren't really not much of this was going on. So half of it is patting ourselves on the back and also letting the public know what we're doing. So I don't know if Chuck or Holly or who wants to walk us through this. And I think if the board has any questions as we're going along, I know Rita, you had some questions. Hi, Holly.
Hello. As you know, about a year ago, we had the kickoff for our hazard mitigation plan update, which was from 2007. And we actually got some good news today. It's actually gone over to MEMA's approval, and the next step will be for FEMA. So we're almost there.
Can you get closer to the mic?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. So we're almost there for our update, which will be great to tie into the other 3. Chuck wants to get into that.
In the hazard mitigation plan, this is again for the public maybe who doesn't, and Chuck really had to walk me through it. Is that all municipal spaces that were emergency plans?
Our hazard plan is basically all the natural disaster hazards.
Okay.
So FEMA, I think the year 2000 is when FEMA asked states to have plans for all jurisdictions. Massachusetts started about that time frame as well. I think they actually just did their update this year. This is going to give us more funding. It's specifically, it's a requirement. It's more of what happens in a natural disaster. It's all natural, not man-made or anything like that. It does take in a little bit of where we're going with resiliency, but it's more or less just hazards and what do we do. It's a roadblock, if you will, or a road map for those type of events. We included with our update not only the typical town departments, but we also included the school. They're a critical facility. We also included the hospital. They're a critical facility. So we wanted to have them engaged in the conversation as well, because, you know, it's not just the Nantucket Fire Department. It's not also the police department. It's everybody together. So we wanted them involved with that conversation. So it does tie in with the other two, but this is the main document that starts the requirements, if you will.
Is it more, I know it's required, is this more to get grants, or is this something like a document that we would use in a big natural disaster that we're looking at in the EOC when there's an emergency?
Yes, this is more for that
Okay.
type of thing. Your other documents are long-term, long-range. These are going to have 5 about priorities that are more tangible within a 5-year time frame, whereas FEMA before allowed us to come up with a big list of things that we wanted to see. Your other documents are more of a long-range planning document, where this is going to be required for more funding.
Okay.
And so, sorry, Holly, how much changed in the update from 2007? Or was it sort of material, sort of substantive change, or was it more just dates?
It gave us, it's giving us a substantial list of things that we've already crossed off, if you will, of items that certain department heads have said, okay, these are things we want to do. It's also tied in, one of my really priorities was including our cultural resources into the plan. Back in 2005, right before we had the original plan, FEMA came up with a document where they encourages local jurisdictions to include those. It was not included before, so that was kind of why I'm involved, and where I kind of wanted to see, let's make sure that that's there. That has been added. In my personal opinion, it would have been nice to have a little bit more of a oomph, if you will, and relate to other Massachusetts coastal towns. But I think we're getting there. We're with these other projects that we're working on. I think we're going to get to that point. But this was a good start. And again, this document is required by FEMA. With MEMA's blessing. So it's a grant that we received. We received the grant before for the original document, and you know, MEMA has been helping us along the way, and hopefully FEMA will give us the blessing on that amendment.
Don, do you have something?
I was just thought it might be useful to talk about what natural disasters we would specifically be preparing for here. Like, what level of a hurricane, or are we talking about a potential tsunami that could come from an earthquake in the ocean? What kind of disasters are you talking about?
So it's actually broken down into several types of disasters, such as wind and hurricanes, flooding, sea level rise. Interestingly enough, that this document, after it goes through the FEMA review, will be coming to the select board, and so we can make a more detailed overview of it. The latest version with the appendices is quite lengthy. It's 600 and something pages, and we cover any of the natural disaster aspects, wildfires. And what we do is we tend to look backwards. What's been the history? What are the repetitive losses? But then also looking at what have been done over the last 10 years since the last update. And for instance, there's been a comprehensive emergency management plan put together. And that was new information that we had to incorporate. And certainly there's been several significant coastal resource type studies, the storm tide pathways, inundation, the study by the Worcester Polytech students. All those were reviewed and synthesized to lay it in one document, what's available for the town. Probably what's most significant is the information that's included in this priority matrix that was put together based on input from the workshops and Malone and McBroom in terms of prioritizing needs for specific projects. And so we'll want to review that in detail, because that would then influence the capital plan. It would influence potential applications for grant projects going forward, such as this spring with CZM. And this is really a needed document to also access FEMA funding, federal funding,
which we haven't been able to do because our plan was not current. So this is a requirement for, eligibility for FEMA funding.
And one of the things we talked about in regard to the potential planning for a new senior center was making it double as an emergency shelter.
Right.
And that maybe there would be funding available.
Yeah, no, and so we want to make sure we capture this. This is very much a living document that will get reviewed annually and then updated on a regular, frequent basis, but not to exceed, 5 years. But it's going to become a working document for the town to start using and focusing on, specific hazards where the needs are. And it does fit in, this diagram's very busy, but there are overlaps with the other projects that are going on, and hence, that's why I'm trying to show everything on one slide, although it's quite busy, is that it does overlap into coastal resiliency and the work there for planning for sea level rise and climate change, and the workshop that we have coming in January is a result of a state grant that we obtained over the summer, and we were successful for. And that work's going to lead to an MVP report, which will provide the town designation as an MVP certified community, and that will open up additional availability and access to state funding. So yeah, federal funding, state funding, and lots of overlap, and we're trying to streamline it as close as we can and try to work together so we don't duplicate, so that our projects match up and things like that. And both, going forward, all the plans need to work together.
Just to give a little idea, don't think that basically the original plan that we had back in 2007, we were only basically getting any type of state funding because we didn't have an update when we probably should have. Haven't been able to get any federal. But with that said, there's been CZM money that previously have been brought in for the, I think there's the dredging program, the original coastal management plan. Those are all other documents that Malone and McBroom have actually included within our plan to check off, if you will. There's action items. Give you another idea of what we're looking at is just recently we had a public-private outreach from one of these particular action plans of an engineer saying, okay, I have a client who's in this particular location, we're going to be looking at this, and which is going to be fantastic because it's going to be another checkbox, if you will, on the plan. So it's not only going to be just us as the town, but also that public initiative as well. So,
Can I just ask, does it give us guidance or identify problems like the surf force break that we had this winter? Is that considered a hazard when we look at storm events?
What the planning effort, and that's maybe more toward the coastal resiliency,
right,
is how do we plan for extreme events and then move quickly to recover and rebuild from those, and across the different elements of the community.
Okay.
So it's a more comprehensive, I guess, hazard mitigation is more what can we do to build and resist, and also coastal resiliency looks at doing that plus the whole recovery cycle.
Okay.
I guess hazard mitigation is like, where can we, take action to not have continued repetitive losses, and building to resist sea level rise, whereas coastal resiliency is more the recovery piece.
Okay.
But they both have to work together very, very closely.
This is what they were explaining to me on the phone, how they all overlap and what's doing what.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys kind of moved into the coastal resiliency plan. Do you want to go into that, or is there anything else on the hazard mitigation plan?
No, I'm sure the questions touch all the areas.
Okay.
So,
they really do.
Are you okay? You okay moving on to the next one?
yeah, I'll move
Okay.
on to coastal resiliency. And interestingly enough, that was started, I guess, just after the hazard mitigation plan workshops, and just with the continued interest and the evolution of information in terms of the concept of coastal resiliency, and Nantucket, being an island, we have huge needs. So we went through a process, selected Malone and McBroom, and started in spring with some public workshops in terms of identifying our vulnerabilities, what the needs are in terms of resisting sea level rise and climate change, and assembling that information to put together a coastal resiliency report and work plan that was going to work with the hazard mitigation plan. At the time we were starting that, we learned about the grant opportunities for the two projects below, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Plan and the CZM 3D Flood Modeling Project. And those were applications that we submitted in early spring, and we were successful obtaining the state funding, and hence those are kind of high-intensity, one-year duration projects to provide more information that we can then feed into both the Coastal Resiliency Plan and the Hazard Mitigation Plan. And they're on a very similar life cycle. The University of Florida and partnering with the Preservation Institute in Nantucket are, playing a major role in the 3D modeling project. The team at Malone and McBroom are assisting with the MVP project. And the MVP project, the major piece of work there is that January workshop that we have distributed information and invitations for. That's going to be pretty much a stakeholder focused group to sit down and bring a very diverse group of individuals from the communities, the groups, from town departments to put together a list of the most critical needs and vulnerabilities to address the community's needs for sea level rise and climate change. It's a state, the state has a workshop guide that we're going to be following very closely, and this is a program that's available to all Massachusetts communities. And so we're going to work through that process to prepare that municipal vulnerability preparedness report, which then gets submitted to the state and designation. There will be a public listening session that's after the workshop where it'll be open for the entire community to review, ask questions, and at that point we will then make that final, we will make the report final.
Chuck, who runs that workshop? Who moderates it and organizes it?
So it'll be moderated by Malone and McBroom.
Okay.
And certainly they'll have their experts there. They'll have an individual from the Nature Conservancy, Dr. Adam Wetchell, and he'll be there to assist us and provide some expertise. I'll be there, Holly will be there, we'll be facilitating as a team. And so far we have, we've started to get the RSVP and it looks like we're going to have a strong turnout.
Okay. Great. Thoughts?
So there's an awful lot going on,
Yeah.
and it's really going to, it comes together in the spring, and it's almost by design, but, the information will then feed into documents that we can then use to prioritize projects and then seek the grant funding. And that's going to be, something I think we're going to want to see more of is maybe, thinking about, organizing that across town departments and maybe access to a grant writer, somebody that can help, package that information. The grant writing process for those two projects at the bottom wasn't difficult, but there's really, an art to it. So we might want to start giving some thought to that. And we're coordinating with Jeff Carlson and Roberto and, Rob McNeil, because these projects cover many areas across the town. So.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this, for speaking tonight, but the visual too. There's a lot of people in the community that are interested in this, but didn't really know exactly what we're doing and where we are. So this helps the visual learners.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so that conversation that we had actually helped, crystallize, well, how do I need to, effectively, try to present this? But I hope it's easy to follow, and we'll probably post it up on the website too.
That'd be great.
Can I just ask? Oh,
yeah,
I have one question. Yeah. I get a little concerned when we're looking at some of these takings and dispositions with the yard sale programs, that some of these paper roads that are in coastal areas, that we are disposing of them. And I'm wondering if any of these now or maybe in the future look at how some of these paper roads come into play as part of our future coastal resiliency.
So very much, with some of the tools that we'll have for modeling and, identifying areas that are vulnerable, there's going to be a need for a discussion of discussion of policy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, coming together around how are we going to handle that? How are we going to make decisions? What level of sea level rise will trigger certain events?
So that's sort of what the 3D modeling will help us conceptualize, and then we can look at things like paper roads in that context.
Yeah, no. And so largely, the work that we're going to do in this January workshop is going to identify what are some of these things that we want to start looking at now.
Okay.
So something like that, we would definitely want to put on the action list.
Okay, great, thank you.
Well, and the point you're making is one that I've made multiple times, is most of the stuff that comes to us is sort of high value, close to the water, close to a pond, and then people get more ground cover, so they're putting more stuff on it, and then it's more vulnerable. They've done more things that could be ruined, and there's less room for the water and less room for runoff and everything else. So it really is a policy issue that we haven't got our handle around. We're looking at it through one lens, and we haven't started using any other lenses yet.
And I think that's one important element of it. The other one is if we needed them for anything, then we then have to take them back, which becomes more complicated and more expensive.
So yeah, this is going to really start focusing on long range, like a long range planning that you were talking about earlier. This has to fit hand in glove with that, because you're going to be accommodating these changing conditions.
Yeah.
And you may want to make changes in certain swaths of land use changes in certain areas that are more vulnerable. Right. You may say, hey, we don't want to do this here because we're just going to make it worse, to make our own situation worse. So there's, I think it'd be really good to be able to think at that level.
And start thinking longer term that as sea levels rise, where are you going to relocate to, or how will people relocate? That kind of. It's just the beginning of a very important discussion among the community. So.
And it's kind of already happening in a way. You see some of the properties are dropping in value, and they're in a flood zone. They're not selling as much, and you're on Baxter Road, and they're worth 2/3 less than they used to be. I mean, the market is sort of adjusting for it as it is. But I think it's, there's more, you've got to be able to put more to it.
And then the municipal responsibilities that we have, regardless of what the property value does, I think is something we haven't been able to look at comprehensively yet.
Okay. Anything else from the board, or anything else we need to know?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank
for all
you.
your work
Thank
you're
you.
doing. Really appreciate it. Okay, team, on to number 4, continued review, finalization of requests for qualifications for adult use marijuana, retail, medical marijuana dispensary. Okay, I want to show a little appreciation for all the work that town admin, Erica and Libby and others have been doing, town council for this RFQ. It's been a ton of work, and I reviewed it the last couple of days, kind of the final drafts, and I really liked it. Like where we are right now, but I think today we're going to discuss this, add any edits. Libby's going to walk us through a little bit, and hopefully at the end of this, we will feel good about kind of going forward with whatever edits we put forward, and maybe ratifying it at a later date. Libby?
So there's a lot of information in your packet. This has been kind of fluid because every time we've prepared something, it gets sent out to review, and then there's a little bit more change that comes in, and a lot of different things are going on here. So what was sent out to you, I think yesterday, draft as of 11/27/18, is the most updated RFQ. So since your last meeting on November 7th, we've gotten a couple of comments. Not a couple. We've gotten a number of comments from different parties, including Act Natural and the other group represented by Mr. Cohen. And we've worked in a number of their suggestions. It's been all reviewed by town council. So what I wanted to do was, and it's been put into a more appropriate format. So I wanted to just take you through some comments that I want to make sure you're good with. I think the first one is on page 4. There was a suggestion for a proposal requirement, number 6. It's highlighted and stricken there, but it's entitled Demonstration of Historical Local Residency, Community Involvement, and/or Community Support of the Applying Entities, Affiliated Officers, Personnel, and Controlling Persons. So there was a back and forth between me and town council about whether this should be a minimum criteria, meaning a proposal requirement, or should it be incorporated into a comparative criteria? So long story short, we've made it a comparative criteria. Okay, so I'll get to that in a second. all the rest of these, well, maybe I should actually sort of back up a bit and take you through the whole thing a little bit better. Can you just go back to the first page, Erica? So the first section here is just the notice. This is the notice that would go in the, I guess, the newspaper where we're going to advertise this thing, and it's going to be posted online. So this notice will go in. And then the submission of the proposal lists all of how the proposal is intended to be submitted. It's listed there. And then there's on page 3, there starts an introduction and background really as to why we're doing this. And then there are the proposal requirements. This is a list of all the items that must be submitted with the proposal.
Libby, does it make sense for us the board to just to see if we have any discussion items or edits on proposed requirements, go over that?
Yeah, sure.
And then
as we go, if you have any of that, let me know.
And then,
Yep.
then we can go to the evaluation process, and so just kind of split it up. So if anybody from the public wants to, or do you want to kind of just review it all and then see what we have to say?
Sort of intending to review it all, and then if people have questions or comments or whatever, we can get them. But whatever, however you wish to do it. Page 6, I just want to point a couple of things out. Item 15, and by the way, the numbering is probably off here, so that'll get fixed. Item 15, highlighted, must adhere to all local regulations. This is an item that is not complete yet. We haven't even begun to tackle local regulations. So they're going to have to understand, basically, that when we do have them, they have to adhere to them. 16, demonstrate a willingness to sign draft HCA's host community agreements. And actually, as it turns out, there's really one host community agreement, and that came in today. We've been going back and forth with it, and it basically, we used the Green Lady terms of the medical and the adult use HCA for them as the base model, as we had previously discussed. And I think that we'll get to the HCA in a minute. I didn't even get to look at it today, but I think there's a term sheet. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. But instead of having you all go through all of the legal wording in that, we wanted to point out really the main terms that you want to be sure are included in an HCA. So then we have the evaluation process. So basically, this is how the proposals will be evaluated. There are 3 different types of rankings for each criteria. The criteria were taken from other towns' RFQs, and the suggestions that we received, and also prepared by town council. Page 7. There's a comparative criteria called staffing, jobs creation, potential benefit to the community. And again, this was a little bit of a back and forth between town council and I. There was a suggestion, you may also want to consider number and types of jobs and range of salaries and wages. And quite frankly, I thought that we were getting a little too detailed on that. And that would mean, again, the establishment of additional rankings to figure all that out. And that seemed sort of overly complicated. So I did not include that. I just left it as it was written there. Moving down a little bit more, the first highlighted phrase there that's stricken, applicants who are residents of the town of Nantucket will be given priority in the event of a tie in ranking. That came from another town. And town council had a recommended change there, which is following that unstricken highlighted item. So I just want to make sure you are good with that.
I'm fine.
You want us to wait till the end to comment on these? That's what I was getting at in the beginning.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you all want to comment, you all feel free to comment anytime you want.
Okay, 'cause I have lots of comments, but you said you were going to take us through it.
Okay, then sorry. Yes, let's go back to me taking you through it, and then we'll go back to your comments. Page 8. The item titled proximity, which is stricken, that entire thing is going to be stricken, and there's a corresponding comment from town council explaining why. I won't go through that whole thing, but it was recommended by town council to strike that, and so I just went with it. And John could explain if need be, but it's pretty well outlined there in the comment. page 9, there was a recommendation about evaluating some letters that potentially the applying entity might submit, and that started sounding a bit complicated, so I did not include that. So do you want to go back through this?
Yeah, I'd like to
And
just.
then we can get to the HCA at the end?
Yep, and we can get into the confidentiality if we need to talk about that at all at the end as
Yep,
well.
and the timeline and all, sure.
So I want to know if the board has any, thing with the proposed requirements, any questions or edits. I had a couple. Number 3, well, let's see. It's like number 2 proposed requirements is 1 through 17. 1 through 16, so page 4 starts there. The board have any questions or edits, thoughts? No? Okay, so I had one. I think it's number 10. Let me see if it's, I printed this out the day before. So yeah, number 10. I don't know if we need the first sentence in there. Intent to seek license from other Massachusetts communities and proposed additional locations. Applicants can tell us whatever they want. Intent, I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. I just don't know if we need that as a board. What they've done before, what their involvement is in other, that makes sense to me. But intent, I don't know. They're going to tell us whatever we think we want to hear. I just don't think it's needed.
That just came from another town.
Right.
So totally up to you.
Do you want to keep it in?
Well, I think that it's probably more relevant as long as any pending applications have to be included in this, which I think
if it was
is
worded like that, that would make sense.
Yeah, which I think is we get in the line beneath it.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, I see what you mean about you can say yes or no.
Yep, I would strike it if you guys don't mind. Number 15, I believe it's. Let me double check. Which one's the traffic study? So number 12. I don't know if we need a traffic study. I have number 12 in front of me.
It has traffic and parking plan.
Traffic and parking is the start, but the very last sentence, traffic study required.
There's 2 12s and 13s and 11s.
Yeah, so
I just don't know if we've had any other. I'm trying to think of similar businesses, whether it's UPS or did Stop and Shop have to do a traffic study? I understand traffic and parking plan, but a whole study.
I think the intent here was not necessarily that you all would require, but they would have to produce one if local zoning requires it. So if the zoning bylaw requires it, or if, I guess, the planning board would
The special
require
permit required it.
as part of the special
Okay.
permit process.
I just didn't know if we. I just want to make sure we require that for an RFQ.
I don't read it
traffic
like
study.
Well, I don't know if we need a study, but we do. I mean, if you've been reading the news at all, in the couple towns that have it, they have hour and a half backups of traffic. They've got 12-hour lines of people standing outside in terrible rain for 12 hours. These things are doing $220,000 a day in business. So I think, if we only have one shop open and we have some sort of, and Amelia Drive is a cluster, what are you going to do? I think that should be, that plan should be in there. If something like that happens, how are you going to handle it?
So that I agree with. I just want to be clear on, we're not wanting how's the traffic going to be on Surfside Road when an actual traffic study. Maybe I'm just kind of going overboard on the terminology.
You want to know? Yeah,
I agree with you.
Well, how do we put in what I'm talking?
Yeah.
Because there should be some, and some willingness on the part of them to work with. It shouldn't just be, oh, well, that's the police's job to direct traffic. See you later. What's happening, I think it's Leicester, what's happening there is they're having to hire police and hire, open land to park cars and direct people down the street. I mean, it's a lot of stuff going on. So I think, if it becomes anything, even a small sample of that here, we need to be prepared. That's all.
I think what we also don't know is how much of that is the novelty of them opening the doors. I think if the local zoning wants a traffic study, I think it would be worth it because they do potentially have a much bigger impact and much less predictable, at least at this stage, than a grocery store or some of the other businesses that don't have to have a traffic study or any of these things anyways. So I think if zoning needs it, then yes, but I think a good traffic plan that anticipates some of the heavy traffic they might have would be ideal.
So can we take it away, and if zoning or planning needs it, then they'll ask for it. But I'm saying, because this is for the RFQ, and they're not going to get to planning or zone or anything until after
It's going to
this.
be a planning board permit that would require the traffic study generally.
Yeah, I don't read it as, John can weigh in on the legality of it. I don't read it as saying they have to provide a traffic study as part of the RFQ.
Okay.
I just read it as more of an FYI. You might have to provide one if required by local zoning.
Okay.
And if you outline how you're going, if you outline to the group that's going to be choosing how you're going to handle this if it's a problem, that will help them make the decision. I think it should be in there how much thought has gone into it, because I don't think it has to. Anyway.
And if they've done one, and then they can include it.
Okay. Do you want to add any language to that at all? I don't know what it would be. 'Cause it would be helpful if that was thought through.
Well, you're asking right here. You're asking traffic and parking plan, including for any overflow parking. I think that's kind of.
So it's enough in there. Okay.
I think and a study. I think that's what you're asking for already in a way.
All right. I just want to be clear on that. Did someone from the public want to speak on that particular item? On a traffic study item, number 15. Yet come to the microphone, please. Sorry, I saw your hand up. I was just trying to get through our conversation first.
Chris Holgate, 104 Somerset. I am also a butter on that road where the building is proposed to go in, and as it is now, trying to get out on Old South Road is hard in the summertime. This morning there was traffic backed up to Young's Way going to the Rotary. So, just trying to get out is ridiculous.
So you'd like to see a plan?
Yeah.
Traffic plans and
definitely
in there.
I would actually not like to see it there at all,
but we're talking about RFQ right now.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
David Martin, 22B Daffodil Lane. When it comes to the traffic, I think that is an incredibly important issue. I think, like Mr. Fee said, that the traffic in Leicester, or however you say it, is a nightmare. Those people are wanting that dispensary shut down, actually, because the traffic has become so bad, and none of this was expected. I don't know whether they were required to do a traffic study, but I think if they weren't, I think it might have gone a long way towards alleviating at least some of those initial problems. One of the, well, first of all, let's speak to the novelty issue. This past spring, when I was on vacation, we went out to California, and I went to a dispensary out there. They've had this for a long time. And I was, I think, probably about the 40th person in line at that point at this one dispensary, and they have numerous dispensaries all over the place there. And there were still a lot of people there, which creates a lot of traffic. The other thing that you might want to take into account is that Nantucket is going to be its sole source for this stuff. And as such, people aren't going to have a choice to go to other places easily, other towns, other cities, to go visit other dispensaries. They're going to have the one or two here, I guess, here, and that's going to be it. So all of that traffic doesn't have any other place to go if they want to get their product. So that traffic is going to be there, and it's going to be there constantly. And also, as a seasonal resort community, we have the potential for a huge turnover all the time, and that brings fresh customers that are going to also want the product. It's very popular. I think people don't have any idea how many people actually use this stuff.
So do you like how number 12 is written?
I like how number 12 is written. I would like a traffic study, an official traffic study done of the area that the dispensary is proposed to be put in, if possible. But as in my opinion, time is extremely of the essence with this stuff. I don't want that to hold the process up for an extended period of time. We need this stuff yesterday, not tomorrow.
It'll go to planning, so it's not going to hold up this RFQ process.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's all I had on the proposal requirements. Anybody else?
I know there was a lot of effort put in.
Yeah. Mine were just kind of clarifications to make sure.
Just going back to number 6, the one that was stricken. So essentially, we're deciding that that local residence, that's going to be more comparative criteria as opposed to.
It has been moved to the to be a comparative criteria. Yes.
Okay.
It's number 6.
Okay, that's fine. I was just clarifying,
Okay.
making sure I understood that it was in there somewhere.
We okay moving on to the evaluation process?
Mm-hmm.
How's the board feel on those? 1 through 6, 1 through 7, 8?
I haven't read my points of order or Robert's rules or whatever. Is there any way that the public can comment on number 6 before you move on? The stricken one?
It's not a public hearing. I'd be happy to take some public comment. But I think number 6 is just moved into the evaluation. It's still there. There's two things here. Rita and I had a 2-hour conversation on
That's a different one than I was thinking anyway.
proposed requirements versus criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're one and the same.
I have a question about the proximity one because it looks like potentially, I think it's one of the citizen warrant articles, that there's a reduction to the 2,000-foot minimum buffer. So I'm just wondering how, if we did number 6, proximity in the evaluation criteria, it's in the next section.
It's page 8.
Sorry, yeah.
It's stricken.
So we've taken it out on the basis that it's already covered by local regulation. But if that changes, I'm just wondering if we want to keep it in there, but also if it would hold any water if the local regulation changes to 500 feet.
Do we need town council to comment on this? Because if someone has already bought a property and they're applying, are they grandfathered in?
Well,
if it changes in April?
Right. If it doesn't change and they've already bought it and it's closer than the 2,000, then
Right.
it sort of stays as is. I guess I've just heard a lot of concern about there being too much clustering. So just understanding how if we did take this out and it changes, how that then changes where these can lay out. But I think it is a town council question. John, if we kept the applying entity's proposed location within 2,000 feet of another licensed co-located establishment. So if we kept these evaluation criteria and a local regulation changed it to 500 feet, is this then invalid, or do we still use it as evaluation criteria?
No, if the host community agreement provided for a minimum of 2,000 feet, then that's a contractual obligation that they would have to comply with, regardless of whether the zoning was relaxed, if you will, at a later date.
Okay.
Now, any zoning bylaw that is enacted that would change what occurred in October, it gets a little bit complicated, but in essence, if they already have their building permit, then they would be grandfathered. If they didn't have their building permit, they would be subject to the new regulation.
Okay.
I would think that issue would also come up in the traffic study part of it. If there's one existing and it's already bringing X amount of traffic and another one wants to go 2,000 feet, 500 feet, 5,000 feet, but it's still the same feeder road, I would think that would be, something that would come up in the initial discussions. But
Do you have something?
Something that, it's not exactly in regard to this, but this traffic situation is really concerning to me because we've essentially put all of the zoning for these businesses in the Old South Road corridor, whether they're at one end or the other or in the middle. That's where this zoning is because the rest of the CN is too close to a school. So, and we cannot get traffic improvements passed. So I just think that we need to talk about that a little bit at some point.
Town meeting has a couple CN changes requested. I don't know who wants CN property, but it's looking pretty good with those sales numbers off island.
Do we want to add a proximity back in? Do we want to? I mean, town council's kind of said not to do it this way, to do it as a couple suggestions in the blue.
Yeah.
If you've read that.
I think it would be interesting as part of a comparative criteria to look at, I mean, I think there is an advantage or potential advantage to the location. I think taking that into consideration probably is part of how we would evaluate these. So I would add it back in because I think we are looking at it differently than just a 2,000-foot strict buffer.
So you'd put it back into this last section.
I would.
I think it makes sense.
And I think that
It's
even
important based on what we're learning now.
Yeah, and I think, even if we did the traffic studies, I'm sort of expecting those traffic studies to anticipate where I wouldn't trust the traffic studies that are generated by the applicants in a short period of time as much as I think just having the opportunity to look at the proximity ourselves and make some decisions.
You mean you've read the traffic studies we get that say it's already failed and I'm just making it a little worse? Yeah, those are, okay.
There was a lot of discussion about that last night.
Yeah. That's always interesting to me. It's failed here and we're just making it a little worse. And they say that in 80 pages. But
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah, Rita, I'm not so sure. I mean, I usually try to lean on what town council has written. I mean, it's a little confusing. I don't know if John can walk us through this Katie has said you shouldn't make this a criteria. You can connect it to zoning. It's a zoning limitation. If you want to consider this as a criteria of RFQ, you could include the location of the establishment as meeting the siding and buffer requirements of the zoning bylaw as part of the mandatory supporting documentation to be submitted. Is that kind of what you're wanting to?
Well, I suppose I'm looking at it not so much as a criteria, but this is that difference between comparative evaluation. So it's not that you have to be 2,500 feet away or 3,000 feet away or 1,800. Right now you have to be 2,000. It's more looking at it as in looking at all the applications. How does your proximity make you a more advantageous applicant? So I don't see it as, I see it as being evaluative as opposed to, I suppose what Katie was suggesting there, where it's a criteria.
Is like a proposed requirement?
Yeah, as a proposed requirement.
It should be comparison in regard to all access. Bus service, bicycle paths,
Right.
sidewalks, every aspect of it, ins and outs and connecting streets, different ways to get around. That should all be.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, it's general proximity to other establishments, but also all the other sort of infrastructure amenities.
Is that already in the requirements somewhere? Location and.
A lot of that is stuff that gets reviewed at planning level, but when
I
you're
suppose.
comparing between
Mhm.
two and awarding this prior to it going to planning board, maybe that does need to be contemplated.
Okay. Did you have
Chairman, I have a number of comments, but just on this specific issue, what my comment was that the proximity question is really extremely narrowly tailored, and I think it would be more appropriate to be considered in a location, as Don said, that you want to take into account public access, public transportation, traffic. Location is not just proximity. There's a lot of issues, and I think if you converted that to a broader category, you'd get better information. You'll be able to make a better determination.
do we feel comfortable putting that in the proposed requirements, location with, like you said, sidewalks and access?
Yeah, I think the
Okay.
location is important.
Okay, so what exactly do you want? Where do you want
In
it?
proposed requirements, something that's specific to location for, access, all modes. Is it,
In comparative criteria.
you want it in comparative criteria?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So what are the rankings that you want then? Highly advantageous would be what? How far from what?
Walking distance to a bus.
Well,
Access.
I don't know how much more specific you have to be. Like, what walking distance? Half a mile?
Well,
a
these are
mile?
the problems with, when we do look at it this way, these are the problems of having to think about all the different criteria now. When it's sort of, it when you see it. If one place is right next to another place that we're already having trouble, and another one's suggesting it, a mile away with lots of access, we don't want to be locked into, but they're on the bus path and they're next to a sidewalk, and we had to score them 93.2 points, and this other one we all know is right doesn't get those points because it's missing a bus stop or something. I think we have to, how does common sense factor into the evaluation? I want to make sure that we are allowed to utilize common sense.
Yeah, please.
So I think it depends upon, when I read the proximity section, it seems to me it's pretty specific criteria so that you can determine or assign a ranking fairly objectively. And it does deal with the separation issue. When I was responding to Rita's question, it really was, well, what happens if at the Springtown meeting that 2,000-foot separation is changed? Maybe it goes back to 500. So what I think is important for the board here is to determine whether the way these criteria are described, does that address your concerns? And if not, then we need to figure out how to change that. So I'm not quite sure in terms of the sidewalks and walking distance, how that would actually come into play.
I think what I'm hearing everyone say is not so much proximity, but location, and looking at all the different things of what that location means, whether it's bus service or sidewalks or not just how close it is to a school, but could you walk there from certain developments? Can you overall location? Is that what I'm hearing? No?
Well, that was what I was getting at, which is going to be the actual easier access if you're comparing 2 or 3 or 4 RFQ proposals. Don't you want to be able to evaluate its proximity to another one, but also all of the other pieces? How wide is the road? How good are the sidewalks? Are they proposing any improvements for access to their new facility?
So in addition to proximity, you're looking for a location criteria as well.
I think
we probably should.
I suppose, yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
I didn't raise it before.
No, I get it now. Sorry. These going back and forth. Okay. Reading through this now and with your explanation, I see why we would take this proximity out of evaluative. And then I think, to your point, that is more of the initial criteria, the first set of criteria, explanation or definition, defining your location to 5 things that we name off, something like that. But we don't, so we have the information there, but I think getting into then putting it here, we do then pigeonhole ourselves, like Matt was saying, into saying, well, you're 10 feet away from a bus shelter and you're 15 feet away. So we need it more as the initial criteria, proposal criteria, as opposed to the evaluative criteria. Is that correct?
I think you just kind of summarized kind of what Matt was saying and what Dawn was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of it that it would be better to be able to compare the two, the pros and cons, but maybe that's too difficult to draft and it should just be in the.
I feel like once we have it, much the same way some of the resumes and everything else comes into play, once we have it, it becomes part of the evaluation without it necessarily being called out the same way some of these are. I'm not sure, but.
I think in order to maintain a level playing field with all the proposals, that you really do need to define it in the RFQ. And
criteria-wise.
Yes, but I'm not sure that I don't think it's a good idea to put it in the, you said initial criteria. I think you mean the minimum criteria.
Proposed requirements.
Proposed requirements, yes.
Yeah. I think that really puts you in a straitjacket.
Okay.
I think that it makes more sense to make it a comparative evaluation criteria. And remember, if some, for each of these comparative criteria, it's not fatal if you're not highly advantageous on every single criteria. You're going to look at you're going to assign a ranking for each criteria, and then you're going to look at make a judgment about the overall quality of the proposal and determine whether or not one's highly advantageous, what they call a composite rating, versus another one that might only be advantageous because, the first one has 3 highly advantageous and 2 advantageous. The other one has 1 highly advantageous and 4 advantageous. So that may inform your decision as to which proposal is in the best interest of the town. You want to leave some flexibility there, but also have a level playing field to allow all proposals to be evaluated fairly. Okay. So I wouldn't get hung. I think it's important to put these kinds of things in the comparative evaluation. But then the question becomes, how do we write that? How do we draft it in a way so that it's clear what standards you're going to apply to assign those 3 different possible rankings?
Matt's got it figured out.
No, I don't think I have it figured out. I'm reading I'm just putting myself in the, pretending I'm applying. And I'm looking at all, completion of minimum criteria. And then you have, and I look at the highly advantageous. I would be shocked if these guys don't all score. If you start looking at these high on every single one, page 6, demonstrate superior knowledge and understanding of the use of it. Everyone's going to write that up really well. Has provided contact information for the point of contact. Who's going to leave that stuff out? Am I reading this right? The following comparative criteria. Yeah, so this is completion of minimum criteria. If we're judging this, their attorney or they're going to be doing a terrible job if they don't get highly advantageous on every single one of these. And I can't picture that any of these are not going to score at that level. So then I say, if that's the case,
if everyone gets highly advantageous
which they're going
on
to,
every single criteria,
I don't see how they're not going to. If you read these,
Well, if they do, that's fine because there's an interview with them and you pick the one you feel most comfortable with.
okay, that's what I'm asking.
That's how it works.
there is an element of that flexibility at the end, and also you can then look. I believe there's a tiebreaker in here that favors local ownership, et cetera. So that might be a way to distinguish between. I would be. I'm not as sure as you are, Matt.
I don't know. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of money to be made here. I'd be shocked if they don't fill these in well, and they don't all show that they can do all this stuff great. And I think so. I do think. And anyway, that's my take on it.
Mr. Chairman?
David has some experience in this, if you don't mind listening.
Hold on. I want to get through this before we take comment. But I'll get to you, David. Yeah.
I just want to say, so maybe back to this proximity item. I don't know if you want to use the word proximity or location, but for me, the issue is the way this was written was proximity to another establishment. So now what I'm hearing is it's more maybe that's one, and then maybe you want another one that is proximity to bike paths, public transportation, and sidewalks, or something like that. So maybe, I'm just throwing this out, I'm sort of talking out loud here, maybe it's more like we do a comparative criteria that is, if it's highly advantageous if it's on the same street within a quarter mile. It's advantageous if it's within half a mile on an adjacent street. It's not advantageous if it's more than half a mile away, period. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out, but that's the type of criteria we need to get to put that in here. I mean, the type of detail we need to get to.
I'm fine with switching it to location versus proximity. I think
Or having it separate, two separate items.
I don't think we need proximity in there personally. But I like you guys made really good points on the location.
It's kind of location, impact on traffic, impact on neighborhood. That's kind of the things we're trying to get to, I think. You know, potential impact on those.
And access.
Access and impact on.
Right. Not everybody has a car. We want people to drive less cars, so let's, you know.
Yeah, less traffic generation.
Is it, for one of them, is it access for non-vehicular traffic? Highly advantageous if it's highly accessible by bike, walking. The wording.
I mean, I don't know if, do you have to put in a half mile? Can't you just say the closer it is to a bus stop, the better?
You could say close proximity.
Yeah, the closer it is to the bus stop, the closer it is to the bike path, the closer it is to good sidewalks. I mean, I don't know how we define good sidewalks over bad sidewalks, but.
Just sidewalks in general. Multimodal?
Multimodal.
Access to multimodal transportation is a plus. Highly advantageous.
I think you're onto something with the access part.
And, you know, not being, you know, dead end road locations. I don't think that that's really an issue for most of the zoning.
And then, Dawn, what was that about leaving it open-ended, just saying the closer you are? I'm not sure how we can word that, John, but...
I think what you're getting at here is developing a criteria where you would ask for all that information that Dawn was just suggesting, the location of the nearest bus stop, access to a bike path, multimodal facilities, and then you develop your evaluation criteria based upon the least impact on traffic is going to be the most advantageous, based upon the specific factors involved with that location. I think that's what you're getting at.
You think you just combined what Dawn and Matt have been saying.
So I think maybe I can work with Libby to try to develop. So we'll take out the proximity, is what I'm hearing the board saying. Yes. We'll strike that. We'll have a new criteria that emphasizes location in terms of the least impact on traffic would be the most advantageous. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
Because all that would play into that, right? Sidewalks and bus
that's
stations.
the overarching, and then the details are the details.
Right. Okay. Thank you, John, for getting us through that.
Well,
We'll see if we can put it on paper.
Yeah. Sorry, Dave, do you have a comment on that?
I actually had one comment. Now I have two. I'm just wondering if you're going to be judging all of this, however it winds up, on which will affect traffic less, how you're going to gauge that if you don't have traffic studies. Just right off the top of my head. But also, when I amended the original article at the special town meeting, I did it twice. One time was to try and safeguard children, keep these things away from playgrounds and that sort of stuff, where they really don't have any place to be. And that one failed. Protecting the children failed. But what passed was the proximity one, to return it to 2,000 feet, because people are so concerned, and I think incredibly rightly so, that this is going to cause there to be a marijuana, basically one small area on this island where you can get your cannabis products. It's going to create basically de facto one location for people to go to. And I know the people that I counsel aren't going to hop on their bike and ride to these dispensaries. I mean, it's just not realistic. Most people who come to Nantucket aren't going to hop on their bike and ride to the dispensaries unless these places create such incredibly bad traffic problems that they can't get there any other way. So I would highly recommend keeping some sort of proximity and not leaving it to the, oh, but they're near a bike path or they have a sidewalk or a bus stop that they don't control where the locations are. And bus stops can be added fairly easily, I would think. So I just don't know how you're going to do the judgments on these, especially the traffic problem. Traffic, I mean, seriously, call Lester, call the police chief in Leicester, who is so frustrated and exasperated he leaves meetings.
Thank you, David.
I think we could leave both in.
I don't think we need to leave the proximity in because it's already there. It's already in a bylaw at 2,000 feet.
Well, I think
But when you're evaluating between different locations, you may want to consider that.
If one's 2 miles away, that's better than 2,000 feet.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
going back to the proximity is the bylaw takes care of that 2,000 feet. But in terms of if we're looking at, it's more advantageous to be further away from the existing, that's not covered by the 2,000 feet. So that does come back to the proximity being left in.
But then the other criteria is how's the access.
Right.
So what would the board like to do? I think give me 1 second. What would we like to do on, like location, we said yes, and you had enough to go on to write something up with town manager.
It seems like the proximity, the way it's approached here isn't what we're trying to get at, where it's not this, it's highly advantageous as being farther away from the existing dispensary, and not advantageous as if they can't be on the same street because of the 2,000 feet, I don't think.
Well, they still can be. They just have to be 2,000
Different
feet
other
down the
ends.
street. Yes.
So then,
They're going to be a third of a mile away.
yeah,
On Old South, you can get.
Yeah.
right.
So would the board like to keep the proximity in, but
And change it like
reword it?
Rita's
Yes.
talking about, I would say yes.
So how specific do we have to be, though? Do we want to say highly advantageous is 2 miles away? Or
I just think it's the
more than 2 miles away?
Further is
more
better.
separated
Yeah.
is better.
No, I get it. I'm just trying to figure out what.
Do we have
that
to use
is.
numbers?
Yeah.
So as it stands now, the zoning bylaw requires 2,000 foot separation. So that you could include that as your minimum criteria. And then even if the zoning were to change, if somebody brought a petitioned article to reduce that back to 500, well, you've already established that for purposes of a host community agreement as being a minimum of 2,000 feet. So that would protect against a future zoning change, if that's the way you want it to go. And then, and I guess my question is, does that address your proximity question or concern? And then you go to a criteria. If it does, then you go to a criteria entitled location, where we set out the various factors that the evaluating committee will look at, and then make a judgment as to the least impact on traffic would be the most highly advantageous.
How's the board feel about that? Libby, what do you think?
I was just going to say, I understand what you're saying about the proximity. You want them as far away from each other as possible. I'm just trying to figure out how far is that?
Well, is it 2,000 feet or is it more than that?
Well, yeah, but so would highly advantageous mean more than 2,000 feet? Advantageous is it's 2,000 feet, and non is it's less than 2,000 feet, even though we can't really do that anyway.
Or what
based on
about,
the current
what if we
bylaw.
look at it the other way, Libby, and go, not advantageous is 2,000 feet to a half a mile. You know, advantageous is half a mile to a mile, and advantageous is, you know, a
More
mile
than-
more, and
Yeah.
anyone further away is better.
Yeah.
So if you have like something like that, is what I was
think
thinking.
is what we're trying to get at.
Well, that would be that would be rewriting the proximity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that
But
doesn't
I-
do it. That's the
no,
proximity part.
Yeah, but I think that's just what Matt is saying.
Okay.
Works. So just quick. So non-advantageous is it's 2,000 feet.
2,000 feet up to a half mile, say. Advantageous is a half mile to a mile, and highly advantageous is over a mile, you know, and the further it is, the more advantageous it is.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. I got it. I
Yep.
think we can. work
Okay.
on that.
Okay. And then what about the traffic impacts? Which is really a completely different criteria.
That stays in the location, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought we were gonna do, so proximity we just fixed up and
Yeah.
retooled a bit.
Right.
And then we're gonna have another one, something, location, to, multimodal, whatever.
I think
Sidewalk,
maybe it would
bike
be
path.
best, if I might, it might be best to entitle that new one Traffic Impacts.
Okay,
And then we would develop a set of narrative, highly advantageous.
so highly advantageous would be something like, not, I don't know if we need measurements, but it has the least impact on traffic and it's extremely close to bus stops, bike paths, sidewalks, whatever. Advantageous is,
So it provides, it's highly advantageous if the location maximizes the ability of customers to access the facility without, well, I hate to try to draft this, standing here at the microphone, but essentially it would be, highly advantageous would be, it would be geared towards having the least impact on traffic. I think that's the way you want to describe that. We can talk about sidewalks, proximity to bus stops, et cetera. And then we'll just have to work on some other, for the advantageous and not advantageous.
Okay. Board happy with that?
Yeah.
Is that enough to get started on? Okay. There was a comment. Somebody had a hand up. You good? Okay. All right. Anything else on the comparative criteria, which is we're calling the evaluation process? Matt, Don, Rita? I didn't have anything else.
Nope, that was it for me.
I know we spent a lot of time on a couple things, but it was done pretty well.
Mhm.
Anybody from the public like to speak on anything in general? David? That you haven't already spoken about tonight?
I'd just like to reemphasize, time is of the essence. Please, can we get this done and get it done so that we don't wind up with just one dispensary trying to handle everybody's business all summer long and have Fairgrounds Road, Old South Road, and Amelia Drive look like Nantucket Road on a hazardous pickup day or hazardous dump day. I mean, it's frightening to think about that.
I think we're going to get under that under timeline, potentially.
I mean,
Yeah.
but reality, a building's not going to be built before next summer.
For a second
Starting
license.
now.
Right. I think we're going as fast as we can to be as fair as we can and comprehensive as we can. It's a balance. And I know a lot of people are frustrated and wonder why we're taking so long, but we're trying to be fair as possible and think through it. Any other comments? The public?
No.
Steve? Sorry, did you have something? Rita?
No.
Okay.
So the submission that was in the board's package is very comprehensive, and I have a number of comments. A lot of them are sort of small technical notes, and some of them are broader, but I'll try to keep it very brief. On the notice, I think there's a couple of mistakes, and I don't know if they've been flushed out, but it says that the town has issued a license to Green Lady, but I don't think that's actually factually accurate. I think that it has an HCA but not a license. And it says that there's an overlay district, but I don't think the overlay district is correct. I think it's, I don't think there is an overlay district for this use. So you might want to just scrub it for those details. The definition of applying entity and controlling persons is very narrow, and I have some suggestions about how it could be a little more broadly written. The parenthetical in the proposed requirement number 4, which talks about who the applicant is, that was proposed by the Act Natural people, and it assumes their organizational structure. My client's organizational structure actually is a nonprofit organization with a contractor, which was what was required by state law back in the day. So I think that criteria could just be broadened so that it would include both organizational forms as opposed to be targeted towards one corporate form. The requirement at 4D talks about testing and inspecting, and it also talks about targeted use products, and I think those are 2 separate criteria, so they could just be broken out. Again, sort of simple. The criteria in requirement 5 and 8 should be more clear that they should be disclosing both all their current funding and all of their proposed funding. So if you think your build out is going to cost X and your business plan is X, show us where you're going to get all that money. I think that's what the ABCC does for alcohol license. It's a pretty standard requirement. The requirement number 6 that talks about, and I think this was changed, although I don't know that I saw what the change was exactly, but it there was about historical residency, and I think there are lots of ways to be members of the community, and that could be written certainly a little more broadly to allow for people to say how they're involved in the community. The Corey check requirement, I think you do want, obviously, to get Corey checks, but because it says anybody who's involved, it's written very broadly. I think it needs to be more specific so that people don't actually leave out what you're required. So that could be tightened up or at least specified a little bit. The traffic study, I think, is a good idea, and sort of working on both the traffic mitigation and location issue instead of just the proximity, which the board covered already. The criteria evaluation 2 talks about experience, but then it's written to make award points or whatever it's done based on the percentage of people with experience, and I think that the percentage is not the right metric. It should be the quality and volume of the experience, not the number of people with experience. And the community benefits section, it's about jobs, housing, and community benefits, but then the criteria are only jobs and housing, and I think that's a good opportunity for you to get information and award points for other community benefits. Obviously, creating jobs and providing employee housing is important, but it's an opportunity for the applicants to provide other benefits and for you to evaluate those. The proximity question we talked about, I suggested basically you should be looking at it from a locational issue, which involves proximity, but also a number of other issues. The collecting, signatures or letters or whatever, I think making it a popularity contest is not a great idea. But what I do think you could do is get letters of referral from other towns in which people operate, or from businesses or entities that are related. So if someone's in the security industry, if someone's in the counseling industry, if someone's in the cannabis industry, and they can provide relevant letters of referral, that might be better than just collecting an online petition or something like that. The evaluation criteria don't match the information that's requested. In other words, you're collecting, I don't know how many pieces, but let's say 15 pieces of information, and then you only have evaluation criteria for 10 of them, or whatever the number is. I didn't count it. But there's no evaluation criteria for the understanding of the industry and the quality of the proposed operations, the demonstrated abilities for security, for product control, prevention of diversion, prevention of oversale, information you're asking for, but then not evaluating comparatively. The quality of non-retail services like advising on targeted products, education, support, counseling, community partnerships, co-op and craft opportunities. And then I think, essentially, since this is a new issue to the town and we're all sort of making it up as we go along, the town might want to have a catch-all where people can propose anything that wasn't asked for that they think the town might be beneficial to the town. And then the last thing is that the schedule, which I think maybe you're going to talk about next, I don't know if I read it wrong or if it's written wrong, but it seems to suggest that there would be the HCAs would be awarded and potentially to more than one organization, and then the community outreach meeting would then be determinative. And I'm not sure that's how you meant it. I thought that it was that there's something like we do the RFPs and then there's a review board and then the select board makes a decision and the community outreach meeting is part of the CCC process. But something in here says that would be that would be the determinative process, and I wasn't sure that was correct. So I would suggest you just double check that language. Thank you.
Could we check on the last part about the community meeting and where that is in the process? Yeah.
So I would just note that I received an email, while the meeting was going on from Attorney Cohen. It's very extensive in terms of the comments. It's very difficult to stand here and react to those one by one. So, we can certainly take them into consideration. But any substantial changes to the RFQ as a result of any comments that you take in tonight, including Attorney Cohen's, I think we're going to have to come back to the board with a revised RFQ if we think, the staff thinks that those changes are appropriate.
Right. I just in that last thing he said about the timeline.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we checked in on that.
Yeah, and we will.
Okay.
Well, I think we have, the email he sent is what he just sort of said at the mic, is the email. It's pretty much the email, and I could not knock off, we could decide most of it right now. I mean, the technical stuff, no big, I could go through it, if you want my opinion, but.
There's one thing that I had mentioned prior, and we had talked about it a bit, but I would like to see an opportunity, a sort of a blank line at the bottom and I think because it's not, I don't know if RFQs allow this, but basically tell us more about yourself, as in, are there other ways that you are contributing to the community, or what are you going to do? And John, I think you had a comment on it last time, but I'm not sure. I can't quite remember how you put it. Is that in and of itself okay to do? Basically a blank line, is there anything you want to tell us? I don't know if the board wants that. That's something that I had thought would be helpful before if we didn't capture everything and there was an applicant that felt that they had other things to contribute. But I'm not sure that we can do that.
I think the applicant can put anything they want in the RFQ.
So they'll just put it on as an attachment.
I mean, there's no criteria. We don't know what they're going to put. So I think they can put anything they want in.
Okay.
I don't know. If we suggest it, then how do we evaluate it? Whatever it is.
I guess I was looking at it more specifically as in, are there other ways that you contribute to the community that have not been specifically requested here?
Right.
So there's
We just got to give you a mic and just hold it.
Maybe I should stand and try to write at the same time. But I think there's a provision in the RFQ already on page 4 that talks about the cover letter, which shall include a brief overview of the applying entity's approach to operate the facility. So I think that would be the opportunity. They have the freedom to give us whatever information they think will be relevant to help the town evaluate the proposal. Okay. So I think you will see that. So we don't want to get too specific in terms of, identifying every piece of information they need to. There's certain minimum things we want to see, but I suspect that these proposals will include quite a bit of what they think is relevant, additional information. What I said the last time was they're doing and I don't mean this pejoratively, but they're going to be trying to sell the town on their particular proposal. And so, as any good salesman would do, you would put as much information in there to make your proposal stand out. And I think that will, I think you should expect that. And I think you'll find that a lot of that information may be relevant to assign ratings to the comparative evaluation criteria.
Okay. So you think it's really captured in there?
I
or
do.
it will already naturally happen?
I do. I suspect that you will see that.
Okay.
Without specifically asking for it.
Okay.
You had your hand up for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I just want to quickly commend the board. I think you guys have put together a phenomenal, transparent process.
State your name.
Sorry, Jay Yeomans, advisor to Act Natural, former senior advisor to the Commissioner of Public Health at the state, and author of the Massachusetts Medical Use of Marijuana Regulations. So thank you for being here today, and just want to commend the process that you've put together. And also, I think you've gotten some wonderful advice from Copeland and Page tonight. In response to some of the comments that I believe were issued by Attorney Cohen, I would just encourage you all not to deviate from the regulations that have been issued by the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission and the Department of Public Health's Medical Use of Marijuana program. I think that the definitions, including controlling persons and applying entity, some other definitions you've included, are copy-paste from those regulations. And I think that it's important that you understand, whoever the applicant may be, that they actually comply with the statutes and regulations of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's really what some of these questions that you have in here get at, to ensure that any entity you award a license to actually comports with those standards. So just as you guys are going through this, I think you've put together a great process, and I encourage you to move forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Man, I saw you working away over there. Do you have
I'm
any?
fine. No,
Okay.
it's-
Any other comments from the board?
Are we going to discuss the timeline? Is that second, or can we do that now?
We can. I was going to bring it up on things that we talked about tonight. We're going to
Okay.
come back on the 6th and 5th.
Okay, well, let's definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot now to fix up here for your packet for Friday. And there's a person who's working on this has meetings all day tomorrow. So it's going to have to, get worked in. I thought actually we were going to go to the HCA next.
Okay.
And then can we maybe wrap up with the timeline? Because the HCA might need a little bit of attention. I did not even look at it today, did not have a chance to do that, but I think we have it somewhere. Yeah, the terms would be good,
Can I just explain this?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yes, thank you.
So as the board knows, with respect to the Green Lady, there were actually 2 HCAs negotiated because they originally came in for just the medical, and then they came in for the adult use as well. Here, you're asking for a co-location for both types of marijuana sales. And so in discussing this with Katie from my office, we thought the best approach here would be to have a single HCA that would mirror the requirements of what was in the 2 Green Lady HCAs. But that's so, just to make it more streamlined, we're recommending a single host community agreement. And we have provided to the town the sample agreement that combines the two together. So if we can go through the term sheets, the term sheet provisions, if you like. But essentially, in terms of the payments, we're talking about 3%. The statutory 3% of gross sales. As we have with the Green Lady, there would be an annual contribution for substance abuse, a charitable contribution to a scholarship fund, reimbursement for actual municipal costs, a late penalty of 5%, and annual reporting requirements and financial audit by an independent auditor at the request of the select board. you're going to recognize these because these were in the Green Lady HCA. And so there would be a provision for a preference for local vendors in hiring, an agreement to pay all local taxes, even if they're subject to tax exemptions, they would still agree to pay the assessed value, the tax rate based upon the assessed value. There are security provisions regarding cooperation with the local police, reviewing of procedures and anti-diversion protocols, requiring reporting requirements of any security breaches, diversion or violations, and then have what would be essentially a procedure in place to allow the addressing of any abutter concerns as the facility moved forward. Really a structure to allow abutters to raise their concerns and to have some kind of a process to deal with those. Obviously, they would need to obtain all of their other municipal permits and licenses, and so this will get into the zoning question and compliance with obviously any planning board site plan approval that's required, the HDC requirements. I don't know that there'll be any wetlands requirements, but any other local permits, building permits, et cetera, they'll have to comply with. And obviously the town is not going to, can agree to issue any permits or anything like that. That's all up to the local boards. Then there are a series of commitments by the company to satisfy energy efficiency in the buildings, the kind of power density, et cetera. So those are all, you've seen them before, they're all in the draft HCA that's now in the packet. And did you want to move on? Thank you. The provisions regarding water consumption, waste and wastewater controls, all of those are set forth in the HCA. And by the way, a lot of these were developed with consultation with the various town departments in terms of what their concerns were. And, you know, you want to have all of these in your HCA so those requirements are enforceable as a matter of contract rather than having to go through a regulatory enforcement process. Although you may wind up doing both, this gives you the option to ensure through basic contract law that those terms are complied with. And then we have provisions on odor control technology. So it's essentially tied to the nuisance standards for surrounding properties. This is something the planning board is going to review as well as part of their permitting process. And the requirement for actually having carbon filters in order to recirculate the air and obviously mitigate impacts in terms of odor and so forth. There will be provisions on the limitations on use, no on-site social consumption. Edibles are going to have to comply with the current regulations or as they're amended from time to time. But again, if there's a violation of the regulation, what do you do if you don't have a host community agreement that requires them to comply with those regulations? This gives you more enforcement authority through, again, the contract in order to ensure that there's compliance. Because we don't know, frankly, how the Cannabis Control Commission might choose to enforce the regulations, and it's always highly discretionary. So we want to make sure that there's a mechanism that the town has to enforce those requirements. There's a reopener clause if there's a more favorable provision in another town. I'm not sure that would come into play, but we put it in the agreement just in case. The agreement will be for as long as the facility is in operation, except that by law, as you know, the impact fee is for a 5-year term. I think there's going to be an issue as to renewing that after 5 years, but that certainly would be the intent here. And if they don't obtain their license within 2 years, there's a sunset provision on the HCA. So that's pretty much the summary of what's in the HCA. Again, you've seen all these terms before in the Green Lady, both of the Green Lady HCAs, actually.
I had 2 quick questions on the. So this is pretty much the same HCA that the Green Lady
Yes.
has, except maybe the sunset clause.
Yes.
What was put in this one that Green Lady didn't have?
It's pretty much the same agreement.
To be fair.
Yeah, but we
We've gotta be the
combined the 2 Green Lady HCAs into one.
Okay, right.
Because again, it's the same scope.
And then does anything with the sale of a license, does that have to be in the HCA, or is that more of the regulations that we would be coming up with?
I think that would be more in terms of the regulations that you're going to come up with.
I know we had some questions on that. Is that in the HCA, or is that you can't sell this license?
We
XYZ?
we can put it into the HCA as well as an added level of protection. And we can certainly do that if the board wants to make sure that that's in the HCA to begin with.
Any reason to do that, Matt, Don?
Now, when you say sale of the
It
license,
strengthens it if that's the intent. You've got it in more places.
well, you don't want to be in a position where there's no well, let me rephrase that. There are all sorts of things that can happen to a company that would necessitate the sale of the license. So typically what you see is that they cannot sell the license without the approval of the select board. And any new entity that buys the license has to assume the obligations under the HCA. So that's one way you could approach this. But leave it to your discretion to approve the sale, but make sure that at a minimum, they have to comply with all the terms in the existing HCA.
To me, this is tricky because, if you want to sell your business, you should be able to sell it. Now, on the other side is we're doing this RFQ to be very specific on all these different points, and we give a license to this second entity, and it's sold next year, and they don't have to apply to this RFQ. So I'm just trying to think through that. I don't want there could be unintended consequences if we do put in something like this.
But that's why you want to make it subject to approval by the select board, and you can put in there taking into consideration the terms and conditions that were set forth in the original RFQ. So that if this is truly a bait and switch situation and you're going to wind up with a entity that you wouldn't have chose in the first place, then you would have the ability not to approve the sale of that license as long as we word this carefully.
I'd like to protect us from that, but I also think businesses should be able to sell their business if they want to as well. And that's just basic. What do you think?
I mean, I'm concerned, like in Boston, where liquor licenses go for like $500,000 because there aren't any more, and just creating that false market.
Well, we've done that by limiting it, right?
Right. I mean, that's part of my worry about limiting in general, is that it's not letting any free market competition come into play. I think we should have to approve any transfer of the license.
You do on a liquor license, correct?
Yes.
But we don't sell liquor licenses like they do in Boston, but we still have the right to withhold it if there's a reason. You'd have to have a valid reason. We could write in for no reason. We could say at our sole discretion. I mean, you could, depending how you write it, is what you're going to be held to or what they're going to be held to.
Would there actually be legal grounds to do that, John? I mean, we've never held up a transfer of a liquor license, have we? Here.
So if it's in your basic contract, which is your HCA, there's plenty of cases out there where the courts have said, hey, you signed that agreement, and it said in the other party's sole discretion, and you have to live by that. Is it ironclad that a court would uphold that? Well, you can't guarantee, you can never guarantee. But these kinds of provisions that require the approval. Now, sometimes you'll see a vendor say, well, it's subject to approval by the selectmen, which approval shall not be unreasonably withheld. I wouldn't recommend that kind of language here. It should be, as Matt suggested, in the town's sole discretion.
Okay.
Yeah, that gives you the more leeway.
And requiring them to demonstrate, not really submit a new proposal, but to basically demonstrate that the new entity would rank highly advantageous based upon the criteria that you used to select the entity in the first place. We wouldn't phrase it quite that way, but you could certainly refer back to the criteria and say, in the board's sole judgment, the entity to which the license is being sold meets all of those requirements and, is in the best interest of the town based upon the evaluation criteria that were used.
And there doesn't necessarily have to be a monetary value on the license. There would be a monetary value on the sale of the business. I mean, it's somewhat built in, but I like the idea of it being the value of the business rather than a false value on a license.
Understood. So we will draft some language that we can insert into the HCA to that effect.
And will also be in the regulations.
And it will be in the regulations as well. Yes, correct.
If the board denied the sale, it would then go out to an open RFQ again?
That's a good question.
If the board says, we're not going to permit the sale.
Correct.
And the entity surrenders its license to the commission and presumably to the town, we'd have to look at the circumstances at that. There's nothing that requires the issuance of an RFQ. Mm-hmm. You're doing it now because you know there's interest, you know there's competition, you know you only have one license to give. 5 years from now, it might be a very different circumstance. Rather than, waiting online for hours to get into the shop, this could be a total economic bust. We don't really know. And you can make a judgment at that point, but you certainly would be free, if you wanted to issue a new RFQ.
Well, but in practice, most likely it would never get to that. It would be more of, we don't approve this buyer of your business, but
or without
the
these
next
conditions
buyer we may approve, because the facility will be built. And
right.
It's just, it's unlikely that it would be somebody totally starting from scratch.
Right. So you might review the buyer and say, well, they have to do X, Y, and Z before we're going to approve this transfer of the license and the HCA, and they'd have to commit to those conditions.
Yeah, you're gonna want that new buyer to fill in all the financial information,
right?
Fill in they have to fill in all the stuff, that you need to monitor them and do what you did originally. You can't just go, oh well, okay, great, we got another guy there. Like we want to check that part. So,
I think we can draft some language if that's what you would like.
Yep, I think we're all saying yes on that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd like to, one comment is, we want these two entities to succeed. We want people to have access to them. We also want to protect the community from it being sold really fast, somebody we don't know. And I guess those are the two things. We want people to have access, but we also want to set this up for the next board when none of us are here to be able to not leave them, in troubled waters.
Right.
So that's kind of why I wanted to dig into that a little bit. Are we good on the HCA?
Yeah, looks good.
The timeline? I didn't see any hands up on the HCA by anybody. Okay, good with the timeline. Louis, do you want to walk us through this, or does it change now with everything we've went through tonight?
I don't think, I don't know if it's going to change or not. I didn't really think too much about that. If this is coming back to you, it's going to be a major push to get it back to you for next Wednesday. And you won't have it in your packet on Friday. It'll have to get to you Monday or Tuesday.
I was going to say, could we put it on the agenda and then get it to us on Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon?
I hope it's not going to be the push that I'm worried that it's going to be, because I also have a draft town meeting warrant to work on and a $100 million budget recommendation to get to you in 2 weeks. So those things all require a lot of attention as well. So hopefully I can get town council to, quite frankly, do most of the heavy lifting here. So if we proceed to get it on your agenda for next week, with any luck, we can issue it online by Friday the 7th, get it into the newspaper the following couple of weeks. I mean, I didn't make this up exactly, but it's a bit loose here for flexibility purposes and sort of working in unknown conditions that might come up. Response is due Friday, January 11th. The following week, the review committee starts reviewing them, and perhaps we get it to the others that we've talked about who might comment as we request, independent kinds of people with business plan experience. So the review committee has a week or two to look at the responses. The week of the 28th, the committee meets and determines interview dates. First couple weeks of February, they interview the entities. Maybe that can be done in 1 week. I just don't really know the availability of people. Third week of February, they make a recommendation to the board. And then first week of March, the board considers the recommendation and either determines a date to make an award or just awards it at that meeting. And then shortly after that, it might not even take mid to end of March, but as quickly as possible, the HCA would be executed, the appropriate documents issued, and then they can continue on in the process to the other local regulatory boards and the state. I didn't work those things in here.
Question for this board. On the third week of February, review committee makes recommendations to the select board. Wouldn't we just have the discussion and we could decide right then, or we could decide we needed another week or two? Right.
You'll have a short board that meeting.
What's that?
You'll have a short board that meeting, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'm looking right at the beginning saying we issue an RFP 12/7, if that's the date, and I'm wondering why that can't be back, 12/15, 12/21 be the response to. Because I'm sort of where David is. I think we need to get this moving a little quicker. And I don't want to leave it open for, 2 months and have 10 of these to deal with. I kind of think we should open it and close it and do what we need to do and move this, chop a month off at the beginning, chop 3 weeks off at the beginning and be awarding this thing in January or February.
One advantage of having the 21st as the date is the applicants they're done before the holidays. And
that's what I'm hoping. Just get it done.
And my guess is the majority of the stuff is they've already submitted similar things to the state. Maybe I'm wrong. So this isn't like they're starting from scratch, and it's going to be, they need a month. I mean, applicants they're looking at me saying, yeah, sorry, it's not it.
Okay.
So I don't.
I'm fine with it moving up.
So just super briefly, I think that preparing something of this quality takes a little bit of time. A week is, probably not going to do it, but getting an engineer to do a traffic study that you seem to want is also not going to happen in that time. So you're going to have to. I think,
we didn't ask for a traffic study. We asked for a traffic plan. Traffic studies would be asked for by the planning board if needed.
Yeah, we have to get this for them to get. We have to do this, start this for them to get to the planning board. Like, I don't want this to take another year and a half, especially knowing what's going on in the other side of the ocean.
So you think if it was just, Mr. Cohen, if you think it was issued on the 7th, the 21st, 2 weeks is just not enough time?
I think it's tight. I think it's better than the 15th, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, holidays really kind of are going to extend
They're
this.
going to extend it, yeah. I mean, people will make it work. If people know now the 21st is going, they can get started. My biggest concern was getting an engineer to do a traffic study in that time, but if that's not going to be a requirement, that gives us some leeway.
Can it be issued 12/7 if we don't approve it till 12/5? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just looking at the newspaper dates, though. We could potentially advertise it in the local paper on 12/6. All that goes in the paper really is the notice. And then the 13th, I think you want it in there at least 2 weeks. Up to you all about the 21st. I can tell you, though, no one's going to be reviewing it for the 2 weeks after that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's why the first or second week of January, we could start reviewing, which would speed it up quite a bit.
Yeah,
'Cause
it's
review
going to be
committee
more
meets
like the
into-
second week of January.
Well, why don't you just make it due by the 31st of December then?
But you tell
I
me.
mean, they can submit it before Christmas if they want to. but
Yeah,
they-
no, I'm just.
Personally,
If they need a little extra time.
I think personally sooner is better.
I think that's really tight to only give people 2 weeks to put a presentation like that together.
Yes.
Mike Sullivan, Act Natural. As you were saying, we have done a lot of this work. Back in May, we thought we had everything lined up when we were going to do the exact same criteria as the Green Lady. That changed to a checklist that KP Law worked on, and we did a lot of the work here. And we have almost, the whole RFQ done, except for the minor details at the end. So we're very confident we could get this back very quickly. That's just from where we stand. So we have done a lot of legwork so far to date. So.
Thank you. I mean, all I heard is let's go. And so now we're saying, oh, let's move it up to the 21st or 28th. Maybe it's not enough time for them. I mean, I think they're ready to rock and roll. So do you want to go to the 28th, given that?
Well, I feel like maybe we asked for things like more discussion about traffic and that they probably want to incorporate into their presentations. But maybe they already have that too. I don't know. I don't think anyone's going to do anything that week between the 24th and the 28th.
Or January 4th.
You might as well give them a few extra days.
Well, that's why I'm saying don't give it to them because they're not going to do anything anyway. Let's get it in the offices and get going on it. I mean, anyway, I look at it different. I work more during the holidays myself.
I mean, I think if town admin can, and everything falls in line, I think the 21st is fine. If we can get it out by the 7th, if the newspaper, whatever the requirements are.
Well, don't you need to advertise?
There's-
I'm just thinking of what if there's somebody else that we don't know about yet out there?
They're going to have to
I
educate
doubt
themselves.
that they would get it done. but-
They're going to have to figure it out. This will be online. If people are fishing around out there for these things, they'll find it.
Yeah, they'll know. I mean, it's not.
There's no secret here.
No.
This is,
Whatever you guys want to do.
So where are you with the due date, the 21st or the 28th?
let's go with the 28th. If they're one and the same, just go the 28th. Right? I mean,
Yeah, I think, John, you felt 3 weeks was good. I mean, somewhere in the balance. I want good applications.
Yeah.
Maybe they have them all there.
I'm fine with the 28th. I'm assuming all applicants are going to have it in the 21st because they're not going to be not coming in out that week.
So we can get these things to the review committee as, well, actually, I guess we wouldn't really get it to them until the actual due date because people have a chance to modify if they need to for whatever reason before the due date. So it advances this by a week or two.
Looking at it again, I'm worried about making it 20 because I'm thinking about the staff. I'm thinking about what happens during the holidays. I think everyone's ramping up to get all the work done by Friday the 21st, and then people are kind of on shutdown mode through the holidays. And if people can take, personal days and other things, that's kind of the days they want to do it. Over the 27th, 28th, I'm back to the 20th, 21st, getting these things in and having them done, having them logged in and done.
All they're doing is dropping them off.
I understand. I think sooner is better myself, but.
I think they're one and the same. So
all right.
28th gives them 2 more days if it's needed. No one's going to touch it that week, regardless.
No one's going to touch it if they get dropped in on the 21st. Right. That's what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, they could drop it off January 2nd. No one's going to touch it until probably that next week of January, the second week of January. So I'm fine with the 28th. Do you want a motion on that, Libby?
I don't know if we need a motion.
Okay.
Just your general consensus, I guess. So the 28th is on
Yep.
a hearing.
Beyond that, they could start being reviewed that week after New Year's, rather than towards the end of January, so that we could issue.
If people are around, yeah. But there's going to be a lot of people who are taking 2 weeks off because of the way the holiday falls.
Right. So we don't have, this isn't, the rest doesn't have to be set in stone, right? We
No,
can,
none. It's not. It's not. It's
Yeah.
just more of a guide for a rough time frame.
but by doing what we did today, we can move it up 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. Any other comments on the timeline? Okay, anything else?
Yeah. Do you want to settle on the committee?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, one more thought. If Dawn's not going to be here, should we try and plan
Seems
it?
like that's going to move up anyway.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
It's always better to have 5.
That review committee.
So last time when you talked about the review committee, I think you landed on the people that are on the list. Yeah. it was in the
Yeah,
packet.
page 170. Oh, yours is different from mine now.
What page is it?
I've got the old one.
Right there.
119 in the new packet.
190?
19.
It works for me.
If you want a different person besides the town manager, feel free to have somebody else on there.
Can it be or her designate?
Definitely. Then it definitely will not be me.
Do we need to vote on this? Do we need to?
If you're okay with those people, then we'll leave it at that. But just so you know, we did have some discussion today too about how this actually will be a committee that's subject to the open meeting law. So meetings will have to be posted, minutes taken, all of that, rooms reserved. Although the committee can potentially meet in executive session.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful. Be helpful for applicants as well.
So this committee would be a committee of the town, in my opinion, for purposes of the open meeting law. So all of their meetings would have to be posted and minutes kept, you know, as is true with any other committee. The evaluation process is essentially, well, first of all, the proposals, when they're submitted and opened, they are public record at that point. And the applicants need to understand that. If there are, if we were to get a public records request, hopefully nobody's going to submit a proposal that has personal information such as social security numbers and that kind of thing. But we would have to make sure that any personal information is redacted before it would be released to the public. So that's one thing to keep in mind. To the extent that any proposal submits a proposed security plan, that would not be subject to disclosure under one of the exemptions under the open meeting law. And if the selection committee wanted to discuss a particular evaluation criteria that dealt with evaluating the security plan, then that could be done in executive session. But this is going to be an open process done at properly posted meetings, and for the most part, there's no promise of confidentiality. There can't be, except those limited circumstances I described. So a bank's, a proposed letter from a financial institution saying that they have the requisite financial backing, that's all part of the submission, and it is not confidential.
Okay. Board good with that? Makes sense? Libby, do we need to know who our select member is going to be tonight?
It doesn't necessarily have to be tonight, but sometime soon.
Okay.
I guess actually maybe we should put that on an agenda.
I think that should be Rita Higgins.
Really?
Yeah.
You've been very involved in the process.
Yeah, I would be happy to. Although, Jason, I know that you have as well. So
I think being chair, I mean, we were talking today in the agenda meeting, you know, people are hitting me up all the time, and I just, if I
Yeah,
could be away
sure.
from it.
Yeah.
Because I
happy to
decide
do
what
it.
goes on the agenda, or Don and I do. I just think it makes sense. You've been involved, you've been off island, different marijuana, you know.
Testing, exploring. No.
No, not that. Just, you know, like municipal, you know, meetings about it.
Yeah, sure. I'm fine with that.
Okay. And how do we find out the rest? Like, does FinCom have to decide their member?
Yep, I'll have to communicate with
Okay.
them in the chamber.
Okay. Right. Is that all for all of our multiple marijuana discussions? Okay.
So this will be back on next week for final?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Next up is review of 2019 annual town meeting citizen warrant articles.
So this has gotten onto the annual town meeting warrant calendar as a result of some discussion by prior select board members who wanted to have a chance for the board to just publicly sort of acknowledge the citizen articles that have been received. That's one thing that happens. They've all been sent to all of the departments to evaluate what, if any, impact there might be on department operations, resources, potential costs, all of that kind of thing that might not be readily apparent from the writing of the article. And typically, when we prepare the budget recommendation, we do not include any of the citizen article cost impacts. So there appear to be several that would have minor to major cost impact. So none of that is worked and will be worked into our budget recommendation.
Yeah. Town council has something to talk to us about.
So I just wanted to report back to the board. As you know, in October, I had 4 hours of office hours to assist citizens. And I just wanted to let you know that Mr. Golding, and it's number B, came to see me with a proposal for a bylaw on bike safety. And so we helped draft that article. And I think it's in good shape. It certainly is approved as to form. Also, Mr. Glidden came and consulted with me about adoption of the stretch energy code. And so we provided him with sort of the standard vote to do that. So I think that's in good shape. He also consulted with me about the $30 million debt exclusion for affordable housing. I helped him draft that article. So without getting into the merits, I think it's in good shape from a legal standpoint. We discussed briefly the solar energy overlay district, although I haven't actually reviewed that yet. Those were the only individuals who came to see me. And I do think it was very helpful that they did, because they're very important and you want to get it right. I just wanted to let the board know that that's the extent of my involvement in terms of drafting the articles. I am right now working on my review, which, if you recall, comes in a chart form where I identify what the bylaw does and then any specific comments. And I hope to have that to you probably next week now, because I think I'm going to be busy doing the marijuana RFQ tomorrow. So, but I should have that by next week sometime.
Okay. You can always delegate that to Katie.
Sorry?
You can always delegate that, right? Your head honcho over there. What are next steps in this? And also, what do we want to do with this? Do we want to talk about it at the board level? Do we have...
You're free to talk about it at the board level. You may not want to get too overly deep into them because they can't really be changed. FinCom, as I mentioned earlier, was an announcement. They will be reviewing these, and they generally invite the citizen sponsors in to explain what they're trying to get at their public hearing next on the 13th. So I don't know if there's anything that jumps out at anybody as, I don't know, something you want to talk about. Or
I just want to say that I am really happy to see the stretch energy code in there. It's becoming, I know more and more builders are just building that way anyways. So it would be, it's part of, I see it as being part of our environmental goal, bigger picture. So I am happy to see that on the table.
And it's required to be a green community.
Yeah, exactly. So this could help us with that.
I'm glad they're in early. We get to this point where we don't understand the impacts of certain articles. We don't have recommendations, and we go to town meetings sometimes, and it's sort of a popularity contest or who can pack their friends in. I mean, I hope now that we have them with enough time that we'll understand the impacts before we, recommend them or not recommend them, and before we vote on them. Just, they can be, some of these things have really, severe, some of the zoning changes sometimes have severe impacts on the town budget, on traffic, on water quality, and we really need to think about it before we, just do some of this. So I hope having it in this early gives us time to have staff and FinCom and people, actually dig into the ramifications of them.
Yeah, I see some right off the bat that would have huge ramifications.
Yeah,
And they need to be understood.
I know, and I hope we don't get to the last minute and not look at them.
And I wonder, like with this Committee for Sensible Cannabis Policy, I mean, I'm sure we would welcome input, but couldn't they have just asked us if we wanted an advisory committee?
We could go back. We could go back to
Pretty
them.
far into the process too.
The chair,
Just
the
a
chair or
thought.
our cannabis expert could could contact Mr. Cole tomorrow and say, "Hey, come on in. We'll talk about it and set it up." I mean, that's.
So I'm sure this is standard practice, but of course, all of those zoning bylaw amendments should be formally referred to the planning board for their public hearing and a report and recommendation. That's mandatory.
I'll make just one other quick comment on the municipal energy study as well. It wasn't really on my radar, but through these WPI projects, it's been very interesting talking to the students and the professors as well, and a lot of back and forth about how people live on Nantucket, whether it's housing or energy related. And it's been interesting to hear from their point of view how we use our energy very differently because of the island location and the different costs and the accessibility. So I think, again, anything that gives us precise information on how we use our energy and use that then to inform future policy is also a good thing. So another thing I'm happy to see up there.
Will this come back in a couple weeks, Libby, or 3 weeks with town council's spreadsheet?
Well, town council spreadsheet will get sent around to everybody when it's ready.
Right.
The departmental comments won't be ready for some time.
Okay. When will we see this next on the agenda? In
I don't think
January?
I don't think you'll necessarily see citizen articles on any agenda,
the overall.
but they will get worked into the draft warrant.
Okay.
And the review meetings that are going to be happening. So
Okay.
that's what'll happen next.
All right. Tobias?
Really quickly, Tobias Clayton, 24 Rugged Road. I just want to say thank you guys for making Mr. Giorgio available. His counsel is always very useful. And I just wanted to say, in the context of the $30 million affordable housing article, I'd love the opportunity to maybe talk about it in the context of your conversations about having your own article for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I think there's some differences between the two, and I'd like to just have an opportunity just to educate the board through this capacity, kind of about that article and what it would look like and how it might be different from your own article. So I look forward to that discussion, but it's late.
Thanks, Tobias.
I would love to have him come up with his criteria and tell us how he's gonna, how you're gonna pick it, because I'm actually more, I'm more prone to agreeing to buying houses and property, and if you're picking the right ones to do that, than some other ways that we've been spending money. So I'd be interested to see how that's going to be handled.
Anything else? The board, Libby? Okay.
What is does anyone understand the height in the flood zone issue? I read that.
It's as John, but it's as the requirement, like down in Brand Point raises, how much height can you build on
You don't
top
want
of
them
it?
just adding making it 36 feet when they go up 6? Is that the?
Well, no, it's so that you can
Oh, all
more,
right.
is my understanding.
I believe the primary intent of this article is under your current bylaw, it's a special permit issued by the planning board in order to have to establish the maximum height in the 100-year floodplain. This bylaw would take it out of the special permit process, and it would be an as of right.
As of right for an existing home, and then what about for a new home?
I don't think it distinguishes between existing homes or new homes.
Okay, gotcha. So it's,
But they're taking it out of the requirement for a special permit.
gotcha. So they're yeah, no, it makes sense. I gotcha.
Okay, any committee reports, comments from the board? Nothing from Rita. Nope.
I was going to talk about $220,000 a day, $2.2 million of marijuana sales in 2 locations in 10 days over the holidays. So that's when you wonder why there's the demand or why there's the rush to do this. That sort of explains. You know, it's a $40, $50 transaction. You know, it's a lot of loaves of bread. You know, 40, 50 bucks every time the cash register rings. These guys are doing very well. So that's it.
I had one comment, what the board thinks about putting on an agenda item, possibly next week or sometime, for us to discuss about the Surfside Crossing kind of housing proposal, the year-round restrictions. So everything that we've done so far, we've commented on every tiny little piece of everything. And last Tuesday, the applicant came out with their, I'm sorry?
Last night they presented it.
Right, but it was last Tuesday, they sent it out to everyone, and they presented it last night, kind of bulleted out of, 15 homes, the condos going to nonprofits and 30 going over here, and how they're going to deed restrict it. Do we want to have a comment? We don't have to say yes or no, but I mean, what do you guys? We've commented on everything so far, and this kind of falls in line with our strategic plan. Housing is one of our number one goals. Do we want to say, I don't know, do we want to have a discussion as an agenda item about it? Because it didn't come up for our last letter.
Yeah, we can have a discussion. NP and EDC talked about this the other night, and there was sort of a split. It sounds good in theory, but what came out of NPDC is the devil is in the details. So you can say, hey, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do the other thing. We're the best ever. Well, the details is the details. When you get when something that's, the regulations and they're signed and sealed, then you'll know whether they actually match up with what is being said. And so I think, until we get those regulations and how they're going to regulate it and whether it's going to be on a deed or not, till you get to the details of it, you don't really know. It sounds good. It's a great sales pitch, and I think it's something we should pursue and look toward. And that's what NPEC was saying. Yeah, this is something we should look toward, but let's make sure it's actually, there's some meat on the bone. So that was, and the other thing that came out at NPEC the other night was that the board voted 11 with one abstention to, and it was against the density, which is still 10 an acre, and Beach Plum and Sachem's is about 4 point something. So, and they voted against the form of the condos, saying the condos in that location and the density of that level is still inappropriate. And so I think there's still some work to be done. I think that the applicants have done a lot of good work so far, including going down this path of, year-round ownership and et cetera. But let's make sure that it's, it's actual real. And and there's still a little work to do sort of on the form and the density still, according to, people looking at it. So.
John? Don, do you have something?
I was just going to say, I think we should discuss it.
Yeah,
I think that they will be, I would assume, providing further detail on the information.
So I think it would be useful if you asked town council to review that proposal, and in particular what form the restriction would take and how long it would last, and sort of the details that Matt's talking about, and anticipating that that's probably something you would want. This afternoon I did ask Vicki to undertake a review of that, and we would be in a position to provide you with some comments, at least as to the legal issues that may arise.
Okay. So depending on when those come in, we could put it on an agenda item accordingly.
Well, do you think you'll be ready by Friday? Next week?
We're giving you a lot of work, I'm sorry.
The next hearing, I believe, is next Wednesday, correct? December 5th. You know, I don't think it's going to be realistic for us to get that back and have the board sort of make the comments. You know, I'll have to consult with George in terms of when would be the appropriate time. I know they're coming up to the deadline. I believe it's in January, but there's always the possibility of extensions if progress is being made. And I think progress is being made. The report I got back from George was that there was some good substantive work done. Was it Monday night or last night?
Yesterday.
Yeah.
The developer expressed a willingness
Yeah.
to extend.
Yeah, and that's fairly typical. So, but because you want to do this right, and obviously we would want to make sure that if the ZBA was inclined to, accept that restriction as a condition, that it's properly worded and enforceable.
Okay.
And if it's possible, I'm not here for the December 19th meeting, but if it works out, I'd like to be part of that conversation. But if it doesn't work out timing-wise, that's fine.
Should we try to shoot for the 12th?
Let's shoot. I mean, we have a giant agenda, but
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And it's okay,
so
obviously.
we'll shoot for 12th and 19th and see how it all works, how it all falls into place. I just think we have commented so extensively on every little tiny piece, and I know this isn't done yet, right? We had independent studies to look at, and I think this is something that we should at least have a comment on.